Okay, hi everybody. This is Esoteric Astrology Adventure number 53. The last broadcast was kind of a 2-hour broadcast because I figured out a way to do it, and hopefully it was not too difficult to download. We have been working in the sign Pisces in Esoteric Astrology EAA Adventure 52. We completed, in a sense, the sign Aries, discussing the sign Aries, and we began discussing Pisces. We were discussing releasing a man back into his original originating motive as a monad. We have the final sacrifice in Pisces does that. And so after the fourth initiation, and at least there, and by the sixth, a man is released entirely back into his originating motive. But after the fourth, although he is not yet a liberated monad, as he will be at the sixth degree, he is at least recollecting, realizing, feeling, experiencing his originating motive as a lord of persevering, ceaseless devotion. So this is why DK says the life of service is the scientific mode for achieving release, and he told us how much the Piscean individuals are involved in living that life of service and even salvation, because the true sign of the world service is Aquarius, and it leads straight into Pisces. There are, in relation to both of these signs, the salvaging planet Neptune very strong. So Neptune is a veiled hierarchical ruler in Aquarius, along with Vulcan and Uranus. And Neptune is a special ruler in relation to humanity in the sign Pisces. So Neptune is that great second ray planet. It is Vishnu. It is the Christ. It is the compassion which arises from transcendental realization. And so it is fitting that it would be so very powerful in the last two signs of the zodiac, which are signs of universality and identification. And not to differentiate too much, but the universality goes along with Aquarius, and the identification, which is perhaps even deeper, along with Pisces. So that takes us into our next paragraph. When the individual man enters upon his cycle of incarnations and emerges in the sign Cancer, I want to say, whoops, that's not the one, or in the sign Pisces, I want to say, because we've had some discussion about whether the individual man emerges in Pisces or in Cancer. Let's see if there's anything here. No, we'd have to go back looking for it. I just trust that you remember the reference that I have shown you. In Cancer, en masse, I would say, or in Pisces, as an individual at the first incarnation. Cancer, which is found upon the cardinal cross, he metaphorically mounts the mutable cross, the cross of many changes, the cross of earthly experience, the cross of the first type of blind experience, which the man experiences before he enters the hall of learning. Even then he's on the mutable cross, but finally when he enters the hall of wisdom, around the period of the first initiation, he will be on the fixed cross. He enters the long term of imprisonment in form. His long term of imprisonment in form begins, and the lessons of servitude must be learned. This is the same as bondage or captivity, one of the Piscean themes. He is forced to serve, let's say, forced to serve. This is the case at the third petal, the first tier of the egoic lotus, where sacrifice. It is the first sacrifice petal. In the knowledge tier, sacrifice is compelled. Man is made to serve, sometimes in the armed services in the army, where he undergoes servitude. It's one of the forms of servitude. The slavery to making a living is another form of servitude. It seems that we learn the hard way and must therefore be compelled to learn what service means by experiencing servitude first. Servitude must be learned. He goes on learning until he has transformed servitude into service. And there's so much unwillingness in servitude. But eventually, service is given freely and for the right motive. Servitude ends when the motive becomes that of the originating motive of the monad, even if it's experienced as the motive of the soul or as some inner power. Servitude ends with the realization of the originating motive and the and the will to serve. The love of service enters the consciousness. He alternates between the pairs of opposites. This is the vertical pair of opposites, both from the astral emotional angle and from the point of view of the four arms of the Mutable Cross, meaning he experiences life in different signs on the Mutable Cross, in the various signs on the Mutable Cross. However, he can be born in any of the signs, but in terms of consciousness, he is still on the Mutable Cross. The pairs of opposites on the Mutable Cross is that something higher versus the ordinary ordinary attractions and attachments of life. Also, there is the right and wrong, the attraction to what is good and what is evil on the emotional plane. So there are many opposites, some of them horizontal, but the major pairs of opposites is vertical, always where you are, and something that is higher. It isn't necessarily the soul yet, but it is perhaps a better motive, something a little higher. So we're always in a certain position with respect to our response apparatus, and we always have a kind of realization of something that could be superior or better or of higher quality than our usual responses. So the pairs of opposites is established, even if we don't call them at this earlier stage soul and personality. Excuse me. The fluid, sensitive temperament in Pisces, fluid because it's a water sign, of course, and Neptune is the most fluid of all the planets and is pervasively present in Pisces. The fluid, sensitive temperament in Pisces, mediumistic and psychically polarized, that is, as in Atlantis, receiving all kinds of impressions from the astral plane, which turns out to be the major plane of glamour and illusion for man even now, must be stabilized in Virgo, in earthy sign, in which sign mental introspection and critical analysis become possible to serve to arrest the fluidity of Pisces. So there is an accentuation on the concrete mind in Virgo. It's one of the signs, since Mercury, that mental planet, is its orthodox ruler, in which the concrete mind is cultivated. And Virgo, sensitive to its own thoughts and analyses, is less likely to respond compulsively to the impressions of the psychic world, of the astral world. So a center begins to form, a center of resistance against the tendency to be swayed by any type of impulse whatsoever. The fluid, sensitive temperament in Pisces, mediumistic and psychically polarized. A medium is a point of communication between two dimensions of reality, and bringing through something subtle into a world less subtle. So there is a kind of a photographic impressionability in the individual who is experiencing the early Pisces type of life. The fluid, sensitive temperament in Pisces, mediumistic and psychically polarized, not mentally polarized, must be stabilized in Virgo. And what we want to say here is that the concrete mind is a great stabilizer. DK sometimes talks about the value of the fifth ray in this respect, that it provides a measure of stabilization to the individual who is not yet mentally polarized. So the use of the concrete mind does give stability. And a number of the disciples, even in the Tibetan groups, had S for stability in their threefold or fourfold keynote formula. In which sign mental introspection, kind of brooding quality, and critical analysis becomes possible and serve to arrest the fluidity of Pisces. So the opposites always serve each other. They are complements to each other. They are antidotes often to each other. If you're looking for antidotal energies, look to the sign opposite a major sign in your chart, maybe the sign opposite your sun sign, interpreted not necessarily monadically, but interpreted as a correction to sun sign tendencies. Look for the sign opposite your rising sign, and also look for the signs adjacent to either your sun and rising sign. Suppose you have sun sign in Gemini, then look to Cancer or look to Taurus for antidotes to the Gemini attitude. You might also look 150 degrees away from Gemini. You might look into Scorpio, or you might look into Capricorn as somewhat antidotal energies to the kinds of energies you usually experience in Gemini, which are initially tending towards instability. Anyway, Virgo and Pisces, these two signs balance each other, as do any oppositions on a particular cross. We might study the dual process taking place upon the wheel through the medium of the Mutable Cross, of which Pisces forms a part in the following manner. And now he's going to give us a tabulation to which we will often need to return. Because we want to study the influences of the signs on the wheel of form and contrast them with the influence of the signs on the wheel of consciousness. Yes, so we begin here with Pisces, and he talks about the beginner in Pisces. Now, this is very interesting because, we assume that Pisces is found right at the very beginning of the human experience, as there are some statements by the Tibetan which seem to suggest that the first initiation, first incarnation, is taken with the sun in Pisces. And yet, when discovering or studying earlier zodiacs of 8, of 10, of 11, rather than 12 signs, it seems that Pisces and Aquarius are sometimes left out, as if they are not part of the early experience of the man who has just transited from becoming animal man into individualized man. And what I think about these earlier zodiacs is that the spiritual potentials of the signs that are not emphasized just aren't there, but that the elemental potentials, the involutionary potentials associated with the anima mundi and with the elemental nature of man, they are there. So, the zodiac of 8 may have ended with Scorpio, leaving 4 signs out. But what I think that means is that the spiritual potentials of those 4 signs are left out because man could not respond to them yet. But that the elemental potentials, the way those signs influence the lower nature, that they are very present. So in that sense, we can still go forth into matter in the very first incarnation, or one of the first incarnations, under the sign Pisces, or in the sign Pisces. So he does call the Piscean individual here a beginner. Here, the beginner upon the way of life, and this, can be 21 million years ago or many millions of years ago, starts with a material receptivity, impressionable to the senses, impressionable, more sensitive perhaps than other types, impressionable to the senses, which will enable him to respond to all contacts in the cycle of manifestation, eventually to all contacts, and in the beginning to those which are strictly material and, I suppose, to a certain extent, astral. He is at this stage negative, that is, he is impressed upon rather than impressing. He's fluid and very changeable, and endowed with an instinctual consciousness, which is taking the place or an earlier form of intuitive consciousness, later to be assumed by the Pisces individual, endowed with an instinctual consciousness which contains within itself, yes, the potentiality of the intuition after many, many years, after millions of years, I would say. So at first, instinct must become intellect, and then must become intuition. Now, sometimes the Piscean types, they bypass the intellect a little bit because it is said that Mercury falls in the sign Pisces. It falls, and the concrete mind is not used so much in this particular sign. It defers to the intuition. So it emphasizes instinct and intuition rather than intellect, although, later, obviously, there are some brilliant Piscean people. I've seen people with Mercury in Pisces that have a superb concrete mind. This happens later. But there is kind of a deference, deferring to the intuitive impression in those phases. Okay, the seed of intuition is dormant in these early days. The mind, which is the instrument of reception from the intuition at this stage, is unawakened. So in the early days, we have Pisces with the unawakened concrete mind. He's the beginner on the way of life. There is material receptivity, so the environment is overbearing. He senses his environment more than many types, certainly more than the Capricorn type does, the harder signs with stronger rays in the orthodox position. He can respond to all contacts eventually, but at first those upon the physical plane, and gradually etheric and astral. He's negative, he's very, very changeable and unstable, endowed with instinctual consciousness, which will become intuitive. Now that is Pisces upon the clockwise wheel, the non-reversed wheel, even though we discussed that in a way the clockwise wheel is a reversal from the way the anima mundi, or the world soul, travels. It's a reversal of the natural order, and we have to reverse the reversal, as we said. Now we're going backwards in a clockwise order, and the next of the signs upon the Mutable Cross is Sagittarius. We go back in this quadriticity to Sagittarius, a fire sign. And here the ordinary man, the non-aspiring man, begins to demonstrate a tendency, on occasion, to become more focused. Pisces is sometimes known for its, even, among more advanced people, Pisces known for what we call spaciness. I mean, or how should we spell that thing? Well, maybe that way. Maybe there is no such word. But spaciness, okay. Spaciness. So Sagittarius is one of those signs of focus, in a way all the fire signs are, eventually. So the man demonstrates a tendency to become more focused, and the fluidity and negativity of Pisces become concentrated upon the attainment of that which is desired. So Sagittarius is not always aimed at or hunting those things which are high. There's a one-pointed focus on the fulfillment of desire with the early Sagittarian, the centaur. One-pointed focus on the fulfillment of low desire, which gradually elevates and becomes ascension. both of the signs Sagittarius and Taurus, pretty keen aspiration can be developed after sufficient experience has passed. So instead of negativity, there is concentration and pursuit. Pisces drifts and Sagittarius pursues. Let us look at this. Pisces, this is the word, drifts, and Sagittarius pursues, hunts, focuses upon, targets. If you look at the way animals hunt their prey, it's a very Sagittarian attitude. And one of the early mantras there is, let food be sought. So just look at animals seeking their prey. There may be great tact and stealth and incredible undisturbable focus. Just look at a snake as it's about to pounce on its prey. There is a tremendous concentration. Okay, and so there must be for the developing man later on as he concentrates upon his spiritual objective in an undeterred, one-pointed manner. So in these early days, the man demonstrates one-pointed, selfish instincts. He doesn't know why he pursues what he pursues, but something in him compels him to do so. That's what we call instinct. It's a kind of intelligence acting in an unconscious manner, and it drives the man and compels the man, and he knows not why. The man demonstrates one-pointed selfish instincts, and though he may be, for instance, friendly, after all, it is a Jupiterian sign, and kind, it is through a desire for popularity because, think of it, the second-rate personality can go along with this, even though, realistically, the first and second rays, as personality rays, don't appear until man is really on the path. But the second ray tendency through Jupiter does appear. Kind and friendly, but with selfish motive. So always with Sagittarius, it's a question of watching the motive, because there is a focus. What is the nature of the desire which is behind and strengthening that focus? This is a good expression of the individual Sagittarian subject. Hail fellow, well met, jovial, happy, popular, uplifting, friendly, often, especially when influenced by the Jupiterian aspect of it. But the motive behind may not be selfless at all, but may be intending to feed that which comes to a person when he is well-liked by others. So this is a good expression of the individual Sagittarian subject and shows also the tendency of the soul to turn all evil eventually into good. Because after all, friendliness and kindness are developed even though the motive is self-centered. So friendliness and kindness develop even, well, that's divine, DVP, even though there is a selfish motive. The lessons of life are being learned and the experiment is going on, and that is the experimental attitude of the Sagittarian. Let's see if that is listed in that tabulation on the expression of the signs through different phases of development. It may be that the idea of the experimental attitude is given in relation to Sagittarius. Let us see. Okay, we'll take a look at that. And let's get rid of that and get rid of that. And open this up and open this up. And let's look at our zoom in a larger font. And we will talk here about page 333. Sagittarius, yes, the experimental approach. Try anything once, take a risk, see how it works out, take a chance, trust to luck, which is kind of an early Jupiterian phenomenon, the gambler trusting his luck. This is often the early Sagittarian attitude. Note here that we have self-centeredness. Self-centeredness is quite different from having a specific spiritual goal which lies higher than oneself or outside oneself. One can be very focused upon one's own satisfaction, the satisfaction of one's desires. Okay, the lessons in life are learned. Sagittarius is one of the signs of great learning through exploration, as is Gemini. And the experimental attitude is going on, trying to see what will happen by doing this or that. The fifth ray is connected with Sagittarius, and so one learns through experience. Then if we continue to retrogress around the signs in a clockwise manner, we run into Virgo, still very much on the common cross, not on the fixed cross. In Virgo, the man who was fluid in Pisces and emotionally selfish and full of desire in Sagittarius. Now that is a real descriptor. Emotionally selfish, not really feeling what other people want, but so fixed upon one's own desires that it is only those desires that one wishes to see fulfilled, and one does not care about the fulfillment of others. That is an early Sagittarian attitude. But such a man begins to focus still more intently, intent focus, and to reason and to think. It's not necessarily that the fifth ray is involved, though in some ways when the concrete mind is strongly used, that principle of man, which correlates with the number 5, is active and suggests the fifth ray. Many logicians and those who are reasonable, clear-thinking people are born in Virgo. And notice the focus of Virgo. This is a mental focus and not an emotional focus. That's very important in distinguishing it from Sagittarius, a mental focus. The latent soul, the soul in incarnation, the soul which has not yet come to itself, is becoming more interiorly active. So there is a cultivation of the soul attitude through introspection. And a germinating process is proceeding. Something is growing within the consciousness, which eventually will become the Christ consciousness. The Christ consciousness is growing within. The hidden man, who is Christ, who is the soul behind the outer form and within the outer form, is making his presence felt, and so the pairs of opposites will begin to come into consciousness. Will begin to enter consciousness. In other words, as we become introspective, we discover there's something in there that is not the individual we thought we were. There is something additional. So a kind of duality is found in Virgo through the tendency towards introspection, the discovery of the soul nature. The intellect is awakening from intellect to intuition, but from instinct to intellect. The intellect is awakening, and instinct, after passing through the emotional stage, as we have physical instincts and emotional instincts, is being transmuted into intellect. Perhaps an intellectual instinct is the urge to inquire. DK deals with these instincts in a treatise on white magic, and let's just see if we say herd instinct, if we have something like that. And the herd instinct, fourth instinct of sex, let's see here, herd instinct. Okay, let's go backwards, and whoops, that was a mistake. Okay, that's no good. Herd instinct, okay. Sex instinct, instinct to inquire, yes. All these are listed. Instinct of self-preservation. I think there's a list somewhere here of the instincts, some of which are emotional and some of which are physical. So we have the, let's see if we can find that. Let's see, the herd instinct, self-preservation. I know there's a list. I know there is a list. And there are 5 of them. Instinct of sex, herd instinct, fourth grade instinct. Yeah, okay, we're going in order. Maybe I can't find the exact list, but yeah, okay. Well, it's a call to service, and the fourth, the instinct of sex, okay. Its main root is the fear of separateness and isolation. The herd instinct follows the fourth instinct, the instinct of self-assertion, and the instinct to inquire. All of these instincts, 5 of them, give way to something higher. Oh, here it is. There we go. That's the one I was looking for, right? I might as well copy that and put that in here. Whoa, whoa. There we go. Okay, let's see. The following instincts should be studied by the students and their higher correspondences. All right, so let's take a look at that. And we'll take this from Treatise on White Magic, page 629, and we'll try to make this just a little bit, okay, we'll make this a little smaller. Okay, so, yeah. The instinct of self-preservation, the correspondences, immortality, and the mode of achieving that transition is for spiritualistic research. There's the sex instinct, its higher correspondence, spiritual union, and at one. This is pursued by the mode of religion and mysticism. There's the herd instinct, which has a higher correspondence of group consciousness, and eventually it leads to brotherhood. Group consciousness arises with the practice of brotherhood. The instinct of self-assertion, which is the higher correspondence, the assertion of the self. And the mode of bringing this about is the study of psychology, assuming esoteric psychology. There's the instinct to inquiry. The higher correspondence will be the revelation of the intuition, and the mode of bringing this forth is education. These are, I think, somehow very important, and I don't know why we have all of these numbers here. I think I'll take care of this a little bit later. I won't waste your time with it right now. All right. So, where were we? I think one of the places we are is we have to straighten out this. Yes, there we are. Okay. Now we go on to the 4th sign on the Mutable Cross, proceeding in the clockwise direction, and that is the sign Gemini. So let's see how Gemini can correct some of what is found. Okay. Oh, how I do like to get rid of those things, you know, they are bothersome. That's a little better, but still not satisfying. Difficult to let it go. This is a little bit of compulsion and action, my friends. I am really trying to make sure that this lines up just a little bit better. All right, that is lining up a little better, Okay. All right. Now let's look at Gemini. Gemini in the undeveloped or average man. Now we've been through so far the fluid, impressionable Pisces. We've been through the focused, emotional desire of Sagittarius. We've been through this more intent, internal, introspective, and somewhat, yes, mental focusing in the sign Virgo, which has stabilized the situation, and in which there is a cultivation of the inner consciousness. And finally, we reach Gemini. And in the undeveloped or average man, the experiences undergone on the 3 arms of the Mutable Cross have brought him to the stage where the dream of life, the phantasmagoria, the kaleidoscope of life, can be changed into the recognition of reality, which, shall we say, underlies the dream, underlying the dream. And the great illusion can be seen as undesirable and untrue. So we begin a process of detachment because we begin to recognize a higher pair of opposites, a higher of the pairs of opposites. I recognize my other self, which is the external self, because I found my truer, higher self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. The sense of duality is at this stage instinctual. In other words, it's not really a mental, clear perception, but becoming increasingly real and steadily more complex there are discovered two points of focus in man. So let's take a look at this. 2 points of focus are discovered. The higher of the pairs of opposites, which is the sort of the Pollux self, and the lower of the pairs, which is the Castor self. One is the elder brother and the other is the younger brother. The man begins to dream of stability. Well, he might do so because Gemini is so very unstable, and so it is pointed out that which is missing is seen and understood. The man begins to dream of stability, of ordered changes, as so often there are chaotic changes in Gemini, and of union with that which he senses to be the most real part of himself. So let's say the man dreams of union with the higher self. Well, maybe I should really HS, higher self. The mystical vision emerges into his consciousness. There's something else up there, the higher power. And he becomes aware of the higher self through the first faint flickerings of the intuition. So what DK is saying here, the higher self reveals the intuition reveals the higher self. The first revelation of the intuition is likely the higher self. We're not talking about wresting ideas from the mind of God here. We're talking about a kind of vague intuition of some aspect of ourselves, which is of a higher nature than what we ordinarily experience. So it's interesting that DK talks about the dream in relation to Gemini. The mantra ordinarily with Gemini is let instability do its work. Well, nothing is more unstable than the fluid dream of life, the constant changes of phenomena. And one wonders, is there any kind of stability underlying this experience of constant change? Where is that place we can call home? This is tending towards the Cancerian realization. Okay, so we've been on the common cross here, and we've gone backwards, clockwise that is, through the common cross, the mutable cross, and the experience upon the mutable cross lasts a long time. Well, most of one's lives, let's put it like that. Most of one's incarnations are on the, the mutable cross, and carries the man always back again and again. The fish is forever reborn into the ocean. There is always recreation. Remember, we have recreation and what is the next one? I should remember that. There is certainly regeneration, reorientation, and finally what? Recognition? Anyway, renunciation. That's it. So while I'm thinking of it, we have here this idea with again and again. We have recreation, regeneration, reorientation, and renunciation. The experience of the mutable cross lasts a long time and carries the man always back again and again into the sphere of influence of Aries, going backwards, of course, through Taurus, where the desires are strengthened to be, in a way, pursued vigorously in Aries. The desire is behind the man and it drives him. We all know that Aries is a very driven sign. The question is, who's the driver? What's driving? And for the ordinary man, the driving is very much the focused desire nature. For the disciple, the driving force is the soul seeking not to be thwarted. The soul causes much disease when it is thwarted, and points of friction are created when the personality resists the drive of the soul. So it carries the man always back again and again into the sphere of influence of Aries, which, through the activity of the first ray, both strengthens the will of man no matter what his ray may be, and ends cycle after cycle with the word of destruction. That will be related to the first ray of Aries and also to Mars. One of the important things here is the idea of strengthening the will of man. See, notice how he doesn't just stick to discussing one particular sign. He has to explain the signs by relating them to other signs. So we have the strengthening of the will of man in Aries no matter what his ray may be. We all have a will after all. It's not just first-rate people who do. And this first-ray influence of Aries will strengthen the will. And the word of destruction, well, many Aries people, they go into collision, they self-destruct, they drive themselves until they burn up. This is the influence of Mars more than Mercury. And the cycle of clockwise progression ends with a word of destruction. So this is the man in general. Again and again, he enters into the sign Pisces, go forth into man, and finds his way gradually around the great wheel of rebirth until the experience of change and mutability and the establishing of the transmutation process, regeneration, carry his consciousness from the instinctual and intellectual stages to the faint beginnings of the intuitive process in Gemini. So really, Virgo is intellect, and it leads to Gemini, first faint intuitions. Interesting. Intuitions. Okay. That's very interesting. How this is gradually established, and what are the gifts that we can expect from any one particular sign. We have to understand whether we are extracting the gifts which are available to us from the sign of our sun and from the rising sign, which should be growing in power as we progress. So it's very interesting. There's a lot of change and mutability in Pisces. Pisces and Gemini have a lot in common in some respects. Maybe there is more sensory, immutability of impression in Pisces, but interestingly, they are both mediating signs. The Gemini is the mediator between the different signs which are opposites in the zodiac. Like if you want to mediate between Aries and Libra, you use Gemini as the third point. If it's between Taurus and Scorpio, you use Gemini as the third point. But when you want to mediate between Gemini and Sagittarius, what are you going to use? Because Gemini is involved, so you use another mediating sign, which has some of the Geminian qualities, and it is Pisces. Pisces becomes the mediating sign. Although there is more a kind of a felt mediation in Pisces, rather than a mental or a conscious active mediation through Mercury, because Mercury is very strong in Gemini, but initially weak in Pisces. So the kind of feeling of being a go-between is more like that, a feeling of being the go-between, rather than a truly conscious process. Okay, then comes a great... So we've been led to the faint beginnings of the intuitive process in Gemini. Maybe exoteric astrology does not describe Gemini in that way, but it is one of the major intuitive signs. And one of the very first failures of Hercules in Gemini, he had five tests. And the very first test was a failure because he failed to listen to the intuition represented by the being called Nereus. Nereus. So he was not properly guided because he didn't listen to his own intuitive voice. Always there's a communication issue in Gemini. You have to know what voices you're listening to. Many people in Gemini give a voice to what they hear. It may be speaking in tongues. It may be all kinds of psychic utterances. One has to work through all that psychism and discriminate out the false voices and eventually hear the still small voice of the soul, and later the voice of the true intuition. Okay, so emotional selfishness, focused selfishness in Sagittarius, focused intellect in Virgo, and the beginning of intuition in Gemini. Going back then, of course, to Pisces, where the intuition continues to develop because the Pisces person is no longer sensitive entirely to external impressions. So focused selfishness in Sagittarius. Okay. Then comes a great process of polarization and a moment of transference. Polarization is a fixing of the attention in a certain dimension. And if that attention is fixed in a stable way, then the consciousness is indeed transferred to that higher dimension. After which, the influence of the fixed cross causes reversal. The influence of the fixed cross is overlapping the later part of the common cross, or mutable cross. So it is the anticipated fixed cross influence which is causing those positive developments during the later stages of the mutable cross, where the man is preparing to go in another direction. So the cause of reversal, the influence of the fixed cross, that's very important. We realize that by the time a man is on the cross, he has begun to reverse, and the causes of reversal are emanating from the fixed cross. And the lessons gained upon the mutable cross have to be worked out, and the effects demonstrated on the fixed cross. There's a lot of, let's say, the common cross climaxes, let's say, in intellect. The fixed cross begins to develop the intuition. The cardinal cross develops identification. We've left instinct out of the picture in that particular comparison. So we've learned a lot of things through the intellect and through experience on the mutable cross, and now we have to demonstrate. That's the big word for the fixed cross. Actually, the fixed cross, in a way characterized by Scorpio, demands that there be demonstration upon the physical plane. So this is the big word with the fixed cross. Okay, it must not be thought that in the early stages of unfoldment, experience is gained only through the mutable cross. Now, he's correcting conception, because, the idea might come to some that people who are beginners and simply treading the path of evolution always have births upon the mutable cross. That isn't so. The cross, as the cross of consciousness, is sustained no matter what sign in which you may be born. The man lives in and experiences in all the signs, including those signs that are left out of the eightfold or tenfold zodiac. I tried to explain my impression about that. Even from the very beginning of man, as man, he can be born in any of the signs. The signs are still there as concentrated influences of the constellations, but the higher meanings, spiritually considered, are missing. The man lives in and experiences in all the signs, but the influences pouring through the mutable cross have a more potent effect upon him than those pouring in the early stages through the fixed cross. The influences pouring through the mutable cross have a more potent effect upon him than those pouring in the early stages through the fixed cross. And, if we look at exoteric rulers on the mutable cross, we pretty well have Mercury and Jupiter. So he's learning the ropes through Mercury, and he's gradually integrating his personality through Jupiter, which is the force which brings all things together. So Gemini ruled by Mercury, Virgo ruled by Mercury, Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, and Pisces ruled by Jupiter. Those are the major planets on the mutable cross. Now, we're not really talking about esoteric rulers here until maybe in the later stages of the mutable cross, when one is influenced by the fixed cross, they begin to flicker into an influential position. Okay, we live and experience in all the signs, but, and the corollary to this is that when man is on the fixed cross, he's born in all the signs, but it is the influences pouring from the fixed cross which have the dominating effect upon him, and those would be the esoteric rulers particularly. And when we talk about the influences from other signs than mutable signs, which influence a man when he's on the fixed cross of consciousness, it's the orthodox rulers and not the esoteric rulers. So we could just go down the orthodox rulers, and we can say these are influential upon the Mutable Cross, but the most influential are the rulers of the Mutable Cross found in the Orthodox or Exoteric position. Okay, experience is gained only the man lives in all the signs. The influence pouring through the Mutable Cross have a more potent effect than those pouring in the early stages through the fixed cross. Some of the later stages of Mutable Cross can give people who are advanced mentally, they are responding to the higher of the pairs of opposites, maybe without knowing exactly what it is, and they are beginning to gravitate towards the soul. Let's just say that when you're working the fifth petal, and we can become not only the dominant expressive individual, but the aspirant. This is before the stage of the first initiation. We're still on the Mutable Cross, but the influence of the fixed cross is beginning to overlap. And so we have these overlaps. We don't have a cut and dried relinquishment and entry from one cross to the next. We can even think about that in relation to the fixed cross and the cardinal cross. There are ways in which those two overlap, except they have that no man's land of the fourth initiation where neither cross is dominant, though obviously the man taking the fourth initiation is born in some sign or another, and on some cross or another, from the exoteric perspective, let's just say from Master Jesus taking the fourth initiation was a Capricorn. Some have said with good reasoning, that his rising sign was a Virgo. Others have other interpretations, but, so he was taking the fourth initiation, and his two major points in his chart, one was found on the cardinal cross, Capricorn, and the maybe even more important sign was Virgo, his rising sign, in which case he would have had the rising sign and sun sign of the Jewish group into which he was born at that time. It is only when the soul is becoming more alive within the form, and the man is aware of his duality, a higher self and a lower self, that the energies of the fixed cross supersede in effectiveness those of the Mutable Cross. So what does it mean for the soul to become alive within us? We begin to have instincts that are not selfish. They're based more on sensitivity, on unity, on looking out for the welfare of others. There's a more friendly attitude. One realizes that one has more in common with other people than one has distinctions from them. The hydra of separativeness is giving way. These are fixed cross realizations, but they're not by any means perfected until later on the fixed cross, when a person is taking the second and third and fourth, second and third initiations. By the time you have taken the third initiation, which is still taken on the fixed cross, you have pretty well overcome the normal ninefold hydra of sex, money, and comfort, fear, hatred, and ambition, pride, separativeness, and cruelty. So you are functioning in an altruistic manner. So let's say that the fixed cross, for the sake of clarity, fixed cross cultivates altruism. Just as the Mutable Cross is the cross of selfishness, especially in the initial stages. It's the cross of self-centeredness. One is a bit geocentric in a way, and all influences revolve around one who is considered to be the center of the universe, not in any sophisticated way. God is a being who's, an infinite circle or an intelligible sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. That's not the kind of center of the universe we're talking about with early fixed cross people. There is necessarily an all-absorbing selfishness, and one's eyes are on the lower self and upon the center of selfhood, that apparent center of selfhood, which has been gradually emerging, solidifying, concretizing, until it's a very definite, if illusory, perception. Okay, so it is only when the soul is becoming more alive within the form, and the man is aware of his duality, that of a better self and a lesser self, that the energies of the fixed cross supersede in effectiveness. They're always there, but we're not necessarily receiving them and doing much with them. Supersede in effectiveness those of the Mutable Cross, just as after the third initiation, and here we have to be careful, because what does after mean? It's well after. I would want to say, well after the third initiation, the energies of the cardinal cross begin to control the man and are of a more insistent incentive than those of the other two crosses. Well, okay, we could say this. Sometimes the third and fourth initiation are taken in the same life. So man is stepping down from the fixed cross and has not yet mounted the cardinal cross, but the feeling of anticipation of the cardinal cross energies lure him forward, attract him onward. It's even possible to take the fourth and fifth initiation in the same life. So we're dealing with the residue of the fixed cross. In the fourth initiation, no cross, none of those crosses anyway, although a man mounts his own cross, so to speak, and the cardinal energies are becoming stronger. Certainly they are very strong at the fifth initiation when the man actually does step upon the cardinal cross, and definitely so. Okay, when the soul is, therefore, becoming more active, the effect of the fixed cross will be seen working out in the four signs, along with the effects of the forces of the Mutable Cross, for that which is dominated and relinquished is held firmly and transformed. So we don't simply let go of our Mutable Cross tendencies, but we raise them to a higher level, and we bring them into a state of transformation. All right, well, let's see. Now, normally, at this point, I would say the great implication, but I'm trying to make these programs, let us say, 2 hours in duration, maybe if I have the stamina, 3 hours in duration, and then let the kind of transformation that has to occur as one type of file is transformed into another take place while I'm asleep. And that will save time, as there's a lot to accomplish in this book of almost 700 pages. And of course, that's just one perspective on Master DK's work, but it's an important one. The third in importance, as it is said, with the teaching on Shambhala being the first in importance, the teaching on the new discipleship being the second, esoteric astrology, the rays are the third, and esoteric astrology the fourth. I said the third because astrology is such a third-ray science, I thought it might go in the third place, but it's not. The rays, the study of the rays are the third most important teaching Master DK gave, and then there is the fourth most important teaching, and the fifth, sixth, and seventh as well. Work on the new group of world servers and the new world religion, and the groups that Master DK was working with in an externalized manner. I think that was number 6, and then the work of the new world religion, number 7. Okay, that which is dominated and relinquished is held firmly and transformed. It's just like, when you change from an exoteric planet to an esoteric one, you do not relinquish all the tendencies of the exoteric planet. You simply raise the quality of expression of the exoteric planet, and it becomes sort of a subset of the expression of the esoteric planet. For instance, for the disciple in Aries, Mars is becoming the subset of Mercury. And we can think about how that would work out, The Mercurian pursuits are pursued vigorously under the Martian impulse. For the disciple in Taurus, Venus becomes the subset of Vulcan. In Gemini, Mercury becomes the subset of Venus. In Cancer, the moon becomes the subset of Neptune. In Leo, the sun becomes the subset of the sun. Well, in a way, what we're saying is the sun becomes the subset of the sun veiling Neptune, or the sun veiling Jupiter becomes the subset of the sun veiling Neptune. In Virgo, and so forth. I think you can, do this yourself. I could. All you have to do is know the esoteric and the exoteric rulers and the idea of what it would be like for an original planet, which is the orthodox planet, to become the servant of the newly emerging planet. What happens when Mars is the servant of Mercury, when Venus is the servant of Vulcan, when, let us say, Mercury is the servant of Venus? How does that work out practically in the life? And we could, of course, speculate upon those matters, looking for a slightly lower method of expression in the orthodox planet as servant of a more soul-oriented expression. What does it mean that Uranus is the subset and servant of Jupiter in Aquarius, or that, in fact, Jupiter serves Pluto? All of these require concentrated thought, and someday I'll give that kind of thought. But, the hint is there, and you can think about it yourself and what it means in your own life, according to your sun sign or according to your rising sign. So this would be the end of Esoteric Astrology Adventure, number 53, part 1. And now we will go on to discuss what it is like upon the Mutable Cross when the fixed cross is influencing it. The fixed cross will be working out through the Mutable Cross, and those fixed cross rulers will be taking prominence over the Mutable Cross rulers. The fixed cross rulers are the esoteric rulers of the fixed cross, but also the esoteric rulers of the mutable signs we are considering. Now, in astrology, the power of combination is important. You have to put things together and see how they mix and blend and sort of hierarchicalize them also. You have to say, well, what comes first and what comes second? What's more important, what's less important? Prioritization is hierarchical in nature and so important in occultism. So, when you have two things going on in your chart, what's more important? What do you want to be the dominating or the leading factor? If you have a rising sign and a sun sign, which we all do, how do you hierarchicalize their relationship? So they're not just on a par, expressing equally, or the sun sign dominating, but the rising sign actually dominates the sun sign. And this requires some sort of close meditation by every individual, so you can learn what to promote and what to hold back, what to dampen, what to subdue. Now, when the effect of the fixed cross is working out in Gemini, what do we have? The man upon the reversing wheel in Gemini. Well, we've reached that Gemini point, and now we are reversing the wheel, going counterclockwise in the natural order of the signs. The man upon the reversing wheel in Gemini becomes increasingly aware of the intuition. Remember, the first faint flickerings of the intuition were occurring in Gemini, taking over from the intellect of Virgo, and increasingly under the influence of the brothers who live in the light, as the twins are sometimes called. Well, maybe what happens is the fixed stars of Gemini are influential. Yes. Although it is the particular elder and higher brother who lives in the light that we are interested in, and that is Pollux, kind of a super giant star. And interestingly, I think I've mentioned that Castor is actually 6 stars, 3 doubles. So it fits so well with the 7, which are configured with 1 in the middle of a surrounding 6. The first subplane expressing through 6 lesser planes. Okay, so the increased responsiveness to the brothers who live in the light, and especially the elder brother, the light of the personality dims, and the light of the soul waxes. I recognize my other self, and in the waning of that self, I grow and glow. We are still 2, of course we are still 2, but we have hierarchicalized the relationship. We have hierarchicalized the relationship. So now definitely the more luminous brother felt within us is the dominating force, and the younger or lesser brother, the more material brother, becomes the instrument. The fluidity of Pisces and the undeveloped Gemini gives place to the responsiveness of the personality to soul impression, a stable responsiveness, one would assume, because the pillars in Gemini do represent stability, and a consequent stabilizing of the life on the physical plane. Some astrologers have speculated that a former sign associated with Gemini was race 7, giving the stability of the pillars of Hercules, of the pillars into the ageless wisdom, and inherent in that sign, though so often the Gemini lacking the 7th ray has difficulty grounding the ideas and many thoughts that come into the consciousness. So there is a stabilization when the fixed cross begins to work through the mutable cross, in this case, the sign Gemini. Increased responsiveness to the intuition, more responsiveness to the stars in Gemini, especially Pollux, let us say, a fluctuation whereby one of the twins is rising in radiance and another is being subdued, and fluidity and instability, because we've been told in Gemini, let instability do its work. Fluidity and instability are giving way to reliability and a stabilization of the life upon the physical plane. Okay. So that's Gemini for the person under the influence of the fixed cross, increasingly under the influence of the fixed cross. Let's move on in natural order. We'd come to Virgo, wouldn't we? Virgo. Well, we have been cultivating the mind in Virgo, probably in a very concrete and rather material, sense-oriented, skeptical way. But the mind under the influence of Virgo, which has been analytical and critical, i.e., with much of the 5th ray involved in it, changes to that quality of mind which is best described by the words illumination and revelation. All of that internal brooding to which the Virgo is given finally brings about light and revelation. This would be very good for the a stage in the Achlary process called revelation. The inner God is revealed, the plan is revealed, alignment, crisis, light, revelation, integration. So analysis is finally rewarded by the light. Let's call it this analysis leads to the light. The Christ, the inner loving consciousness, the Christ to whom the Virgin must eventually give birth is, and that means the purified personality, really, because the Virgin has the VIR, it's powerful, it has the strength. The Christ to whom the Virgin must eventually give birth is recognized as present in the womb of consciousness, deep within us, though not yet born. So the recognition of the inner love, of the inner wisdom. So let's call it recognition of inner love, wisdom. Whoops, lower world. Love, oh, that's not it. LVW, love, wisdom. Life is recognized. I am the mother and the child. I, God, life. I, God, I, matter, am. Life is recognized. The process of the revelation of the Christ consciousness, more and more, is carried intelligently forward. And the selfish aspirations and experiments of the undeveloped man, we're thinking of Sagittarius now, aren't we? The selfish aspirations and experiments of the undeveloped man give place to selflessness, the selflessness of the illumined and intuitive disciple. The intuition is not lost, it's further cultivated, and there is an ingrained humility. You know, all of that reasoning has revealed man to be what he is, and a sense of proportion begins to develop. So humility and selflessness develop. Humility and selflessness. We know how often, excuse me, Virgo is involved in doing those small and humble tasks which may seem like servitude at first, but really are service, and they cultivate an appreciation for the idea that no thing done in service is too small to be important. So it's the importance of the little thing done in a selfless manner, sometimes called the service of the immediately present. A very practical, factual look at exactly what needs taken care of, and willing to spend time and attention taking care of those many thankless details which make the larger project actually work. So life is recognized, the process of revelation of the Christ consciousness is carried intelligently forward, keeps growing and growing, because there's always that germinating energy, that fostering, nourishing energy found in Virgo, the sign of the mother. And the selfish aspirations, what you want for yourself, for your lower self, for your astral body, for your instinctual nature, those experiments where you try to get those things in various ways, I'll try this or that, they give way to this attitude of those things are not important. I'm out of the way. I'm decentralized, an important sign of decentralization. The light continues to grow. Let's remember that about Virgo. And the intuitive disciple is emerging. Light continues to grow and to express through the matter with which Virgo has so much to do. Okay. Now on to Sagittarius, which was such an experimental, emotionally selfish, driven toward desire type of sign. Sagittarius, this is now the sign of the one-pointed disciple. We're not off on errant experiments which are simply attempting to fulfill the various self-desires we have. We have perhaps seen the divine plan. Maybe we've had an intuition of it. Maybe we've reasoned about it. Maybe in Virgo we have humility about serving that divine plan. And so we now focus not on ourselves and our own satisfaction, but on the divine plan in a one-pointed, undeflectable manner. There is this sense of holding that focus not on something low, but on something which has to be materialized, which is part of a higher vision of life. The life of fluid response to matter, that's Pisces, becomes that of the focused response to spirit and preparation for initiation in Capricorn. Well, there's a lot of land to be covered here. Maybe Sagittarius is not so much a climber, but it certainly can cover ground quickly, on the way to the mountain. So let's call it that. Covering ground, well, I wish I could spell, quickly on the way to the mountain, on the way to the mountain. So there is this kind of spontaneity of the Sagittarian, which is not very much directed in the early days, but later the Sagittarian really draws a bead on what is necessary. The target, the focusing is very strong, and the alignment through the anticorona, because Sagittarius is one of those signs of projection of light along the anticorona. The alignment brings in this sense of the right direction according to spirit. The arrow of the mind is projected unerringly towards the goal. So this involves the Ajna Center, doesn't it? And Sagittarius, a major, well, all of the rays involved in the Ajna Center, well, they all are involved in the Ajna Center, but the fifth ray of Venus and the fourth ray of Mercury and the sixth ray of Neptune, they're all rays ruling Sagittarius. So this is a constellation sign in which the Ajna Center, with its power to envision the goal, plays a great role. Projected unerringly towards the goal. There's so much errant shooting of arrows. The arrows of desire are going in all directions. And the early Sagittarian is like the man who jumped on his horse and rode off in all directions, following all these errant desires, the whole idea of the knight errant. But oftentimes the knight errant was led by a kind of intuition to where he had to go to offer his services. So the intuition will be guiding the true Sagittarian. Okay, and finally, we're going to come to Pisces in the higher sense. Pisces here at the final stage, and it's a late stage. Pisces stands for the death of the personality. Well, that's the complete death of the persona, probably at the fourth initiation, and the release of the soul from captivity and its return into the task of the world savior. And we remember, I leave the Father's home, turning back, I say, the originating motive of the monad, salvation. Let's put it like this. The monad's originating motive is Piscean. Salvation is the, quote, originating motive of the monad. So the monad and Pisces have a lot to do with each other, and the release into monadic awareness and into the realization of that originating motive takes place at a very late stage of evolution. Okay, so even the soul itself is released from captivity to the higher mental plane and is abstracted back into the spiritual triad. The spiritual triad, or that type of consciousness, is a truer type of soul consciousness than the individualized soul consciousness upon the higher mental plane. Like, who are we really? Are we this individual? Or is being this individual on the higher mental plane kind of a limitation? And are we more the soul when we are released with all of our faculties, of course, into the planetary perceptions that come from a spiritual triadal observation and perception? So the great achievement is finished, and the final death is undergone. Well, you know, as we said, final deaths, there are a number of them. It depends on what we call final, but in terms of the human kingdom, the final death is the fourth initiation. There is no more sea, no more astral plane, in a sense, no more personal desire and wish life for that which is not of the plan and purpose. There is no more sea, although I'm sure that the dimensional level known as the astral plane must persist, otherwise we would have a discontinuity in the type of atoms which form the lower levels. But they are underlay by the Buddhic energy. There is no more sea, says the ancient book, which means inevitably the death of the fishes, the individualized souls. Those are the fishes. And the solar angels, as fish goddesses, have spawned these fishes, but there's no more need for incarnating personalities. So we are talking about the fourth initiation. No more need for incarnating personalities. Okay. And there is the release of the imprisoned life into new forms or new cycles of the divine adventure, and that sounds very much like Sagittarius and the sixth initiation. Sagittarius and the sixth initiation, which makes of most monads outward bound units of life. Initiation. Okay. There is no more sea. So this final death, there are many deaths, many relinquishments, many detachments that we're undergoing at all times, but this final death, as far as humanity is concerned, is the fourth initiation. When it comes to the five worlds of human and superhuman evolution, then the final death is the sixth initiation, because you can drop your triadal vehicles unless you willfully desire to preserve them for some planetary purpose, perhaps on the path of Earth service. Excuse me. So the great achievement is undergone in Pisces. It's really a lot different when you compare it from the beginning steps in Pisces, where we are susceptible. That's a good Pisces word. We are susceptible to every kind of impression, and the outer always overcomes the inner. Very different to that self-directed decision which takes us towards certain planet, a certain star, a certain group of stars on the great paths of higher evolution. So let's just say that susceptibility is overcome, and drift is no more. You know, think of it. You don't drift along one of the paths or ways of higher evolution. It's a very concerted, focused, decisive movement forward upon one of the great paths that lead eventually back to the one about whom naught may be said, and before that to certain of his chakras, which are constellational in nature. It's a long, long journey on the cardinal cross. We have no idea how long, perhaps longer than the duration of our particular solar logos through a solar system. Timing is difficult to understand in these matters, but we do know that we're spending relatively a very little time here on Earth preparing for that great journey, even if it's a 25 million year preparation, which even began, let us say, in the previous solar system, and therefore would be a longer preparation. Even that would be short compared to the great journeys we would be making towards certain of the constellations and eventually to the very heart of these super constellational logos, the one about whom naught may be said. Check out page 293 of Cosmic Fire for the unknown. All right. Now, let's see. The Mutable Cross, of which Pisces is one of the arms, is predominantly the cross of repeated incarnations. Well, the fish goddesses are spawning the little fish, and the sea still exists. Now, in a way, the sea is water. So let's look at this. The sea is water. Water is matter. Matter, in its lowest grades, relates to the non-principled principled substance in the dense physical body of the solar logos. Yes, so in a way, the little fishes are swimming in matter. It's more than the matter of the astral plane. Even etheric physical substance is matter. Even lower mental substance is water, matter. So the little fishes no longer need to appear as reincarnating units in the water. The water is all the lower 18 subplanes. That's another way of looking at water. Water and matter are said to be equivalent. So when the fish goddesses cease spawning their young, it is because they are no longer there, because they've been able to return to the heart of the sun, or the central spiritual sun, because the human being they were supervised has achieved the fourth initiation and has been rising to the feet of the solar angels, so to speak, who can be released. Okay, so that, I went back there for a moment because it seemed indicated. The Mutable Cross, Pisces, is one of the arms, is predominantly the cross of repeated incarnations. How many? 10,000? 5,000? We're not given to know, and the time equation really eventually becomes the part of the man's own responsibility. I'm sure, there are, when we look at how many lives it took us to arrive at a certain point, there are great variations depending on the free choices we have made. The cross of repeated incarnations, of varied experiments, there's that Sagittarian word. We try to see what will happen. We make an attempt, not necessarily intuitively guided, mostly not, of varied experiments under the various signs and orthodox rulers. Note that on the Mutable Cross, we are working under the orthodox rulers. So when we relate to a particular sign, it is through the orthodox ruler of that sign. And when we have a planetary influence in our life, we have to trace that planet back to the Lord of the constellation, of which that planet is the orthodox ruler, and of those many experiences which lead to successive and continuous expansions of consciousness. Yes, consciousness will continue to expand during the millions of years of repeated incarnations. A deliberate, meditative expansion of consciousness by approved esoteric spiritual techniques. This is more something that is undertaken on the fixed cross. But through the many, many changes and experiences and experiments and contacts which are found on the Mutable Cross, the consciousness cannot help but expand, although things get much more deliberate upon the fixed cross. It is therefore the cross of the Son of God, the incarnating Christ, though it is, in relation to this cross, the cross of the planetary Christ, just as which is more the mass effect, just as the fixed cross is that of the individual Christ in each human being, and the cardinal cross is that of the cosmic Christ. Well, what a wonderful sentence that is. So here we have a description of the mutable cross as the cross of the Son of God, the incarnating Christ, though it's more the planetary Christ. So it is the underlying soul. It's the anima mundi, underlying substance. We do not yet have the individual, the true self-conscious individual, although he is growing during the fixed cross experience. We have more the unconscious soul. The anima mundi is the unconscious soul, let's say unself-conscious soul. We can't really say unconscious, we have to say unself-conscious. The anima mundi is the non-self-conscious soul. So the cross of the Son of God, well, there certainly are these signs which are very much connected with the Christ consciousness. They distribute mostly the second and the sixth ray. If you look at the only difference there is Sagittarius, which distributes the fourth and fifth. But if you look at Gemini, it's the second ray, Virgo second and sixth, Pisces second and sixth, and Sagittarius the greatest amount of six, but combined with another of the soft line rays, 4, and also ray 5. If you look at it, it's all the soft line rays on the mutable cross plus the fifth ray, which gives that kind of concerted thinking, which allows the mystic to transfer from off the path of mysticism onto the path of discipleship and occultism. So the fifth ray in this case, in relation to the mutable cross, is a bridging ray. Now, I'm just talking about the rays as they operate through the constellations. I'm not talking about all the other rulers, but even when you look at the orthodox rulers of the fixed cross, it's again a soft line. So the subjective life is being cultivated, but in a rather unconscious way. Consciousness is expanding. The true individual is growing, but he's not yet come to himself as a truly centered soul in incarnation, as he will on the fixed cross. So the mass effect is prominent on the mutable cross, and the Christ-conscious individual grows on the fixed cross, and it's sort of like the funnel. It's kind of like an hourglass, you know. Here's the mutable cross, here is the fixed cross, and here it widens out tremendously into the cardinal cross, where we're aware of the one God and the one Christ, or love, wisdom, energy pervading all things. The cosmic Christ, we can become aware of, well, the Christ aspect, the divine Son of our Solar Logos, but further than that, we can become aware of the influence, the Christ-like influence of Sirius, and beyond that, still greater cosmic representations of the great second ray. It might here be noted that the cross with which we are here concerned is that of the Mass. Well, yeah, I was saying that, maybe cryptomnesia, you know, read it before. It's the cross of the Mass and of Mass consciousness, and that the consciousness which is exemplified is that of the instinctual consciousness, which average man, even with a growing intelligence, exemplifies, and it's merging into the intellectual consciousness. By the time we have reached the end of the fixed cross, we have a pretty good intellect. Not fixed cross, mutable cross. At the end of the mutable cross, the intellect is rather well developed, though often still material in its interests. Okay, so this is the cross of instinctual consciousness. It's well directed, but it's directed from sources of which the individual is not aware, and whither it is directed, the individual is not aware nor why. he is directed. It's surprising, even with modern intelligent man, how much he's run by his elemental nature, by his body and by his emotional impulses. He's run by those things, and that is called instinctual direction. Even the mind gets a hold of him, and he becomes curious about things. He can't help it. It's not because he knows why he is so, and what is the greater end and objective in his curiosity. You know, the instinct to inquiry, which is like curiosity, is one of the instincts which has to end in true illumination. It is the cross of the anima mundi, the world soul, which has many divisions. Some of the lower divisions are, of course, unconscious and relate to the mass, but individual consciousness is a specialization of the anima mundi, we've been told, and when we think of the world, you know, there are higher levels of that world, and maybe even the great group consciousness and consciousness of the one is an aspect of the anima mundi interpreted in a larger sense, the world soul. But usually when we use this term, we are referring to the soul of substance. It is the cross of the anima mundi and of the human soul before consciousness of duality is clear in the mind of man. I mean, there are many intelligent people who can become intelligent through the first three petals of the egoic lotus, but they are still in the hall of ignorance, aren't they? Because they are not aware of the consciousness of the higher of the dual parts. The higher self, or whatever you want to call it, this other and higher force center, is not part of their awareness. So that's very interesting. It's the cross of the human soul before the consciousness of duality is in the mind of man, which doesn't mean that the man is not self-conscious. He is, of course, self-conscious. Let's put that down. The man is indeed conscious. You see, self-conscious. Yes, there it is. The man is indeed self-conscious, but not conscious of himself as a higher self. That's what he doesn't have. So he's still in the hall of ignorance, and he has to enter the hall of learning, which is the later part of the Mutable Cross, and it will segue during those love petal experiences into the hall of wisdom, or of higher learning, and then that consciousness of duality, that I am two things, is the consciousness developed during the love petal phase of development. Okay. So it's the cross of the anima mundi and of the human soul before the consciousness of duality is clear in the mind of man. As we approach the fixed cross, a greater clarity about the higher and lower of the pairs of opposites comes into view. We know that higher of the pairs of opposites within us, and we are clear about it, and we begin to identify with it. We may have some vague apprehensions in the earlier days, but clarity that we are two comes as we are approaching the fixed cross, and before transfer is made onto the fixed cross. So how long does that experience last? Well, the mutable cross experience is, in a way, it's lasting all the way to the, whoops, something's happening here. I better, it's a nice thing to have. Yes, one has to hit that. The computer sometimes has a mind of its own and begins to distort letters, and then I know I'm in a little bit of trouble here. Okay, the human soul gradually becomes very, very clear about its own two-ness, the higher and the lower self. Now we have to ask ourselves, how clear are we about the higher self that we are and about the lower self that we appear to be? And can we really factually make that distinction, and not just theoretically? Can we get a very strong felt sense of this higher presence, the angel of the presence, and can we contrast that with our sense of the lower self? Okay. So all the way, millions and millions of years before the first initiation is taken, this mutable cross will be in effect, because transfer is not made onto the fixed cross until a man enters the kingdom of God pretty much around the time of the first initiation. You know, you have to factor in all the different references which give different kinds of hints, but you get the generalized idea that in the stage of advancement and kind of on the way to the first initiation, preparation for that, we are stepping foot upon the overlapping presence of the fixed cross. And by the time we reach the first initiation, we're really on the fixed cross, though not necessarily experiencing all of its rigors until the lives proceed. It is consequently more closely allied to the cardinal cross of the heavens, for the mass consciousness, which is the significant consciousness of the Mutable Cross, becomes the group consciousness or the synthetic consciousness of divinity after passing through the interim period of the vital interlude of the intense self-consciousness of the man upon the fixed cross. What a wonderful synthetic statement here. So, you know, there is I talked about, you know, the hourglass here, you know, the effect of the mutable cross, fixed cross, cardinal cross, widening out. I talked about that. And DK is saying the same thing much more eloquently. The mutable cross is more allied to the cardinal cross because you get these group realizations upon the cardinal cross, the sense of the oneness of all groups, just as there is sort of a mass oneness effect before the individual is really intensely self-conscious as an internal soul within the form. So we're calling this a vital interlude. The whole fixed cross experience from the first to the third degree is a vital interlude of intense self-consciousness. And so there is where we are really taking ourselves in hand as candidates for initiation, and as initiate the threshold, and finally as a higher type of initiate, the third degree, and we are really cultivating the individuality at that point. Then there comes a time when we begin to want to merge into the higher group consciousness, and eventually into the consciousness of the one which probably reaches a quite full expression at the fifth degree in Leo, when we can say, I am that I am, or I am that and that am I. So it's really quite a short interlude there, relatively short compared to the millions of years upon the mutable cross, and it's not just going to be millions of years upon the cardinal cross, it's going to be much longer than that, because the cardinal cross is open-ended, and even such great beings as our planetary logos, who is separated from the condition of man by many Mahamanvantaras, is on the cardinal cross. So our whole future, the great length of time that we will be involved in the one about whom naught may be said and maybe beyond, is taking our place upon the cardinal cross, from which we can act with great freedom because we have become the plan, we have become the purpose. This human interlude, which is the fixed cross, is in the nature of a cross-section. That's kind of interesting use of words in the development of consciousness. When you do a cross-section, you kind of cut something and you look at it from a different perspective. It's a narrow passage of intense cultivation. For the moment, the group conscious emphasis, whether of the unconscious maths or of the super conscious one, are cut off from the man who is intensely self-aware as an individual upon the fixed cross. Of course, this is already happening to a degree in the later mutable cross, but his awareness of himself as an immortal soul who is cultivating expression within form, that is cultivated on the fixed cross. This human interlude is in the nature of a cross-section in the development of consciousness, but the main emphasis is the unfoldment of the mass consciousness of all the kingdoms in nature into the group consciousness of the three highest kingdoms through the mediatorship of the human kingdom, which through its peculiar and specific type of awareness can relate the higher and lower. Okay, well now, is he talking about the mutable cross or the fixed cross? Can relate the higher and lower expression of divinity. The human interlude. Well, there is a human interlude on part of the mutable cross as well, but it's a somewhat ignorant human interlude because the man does not really realize who he is. Increasingly, he does realize who he is on the fixed cross, where he discovers his true soul identity. The main emphasis is the unfoldment of the mass consciousness of all the kingdoms in nature. That is certainly what we serve. We, the macrocosm, to the lower kingdoms, serve that unfoldment. Eventually into the group consciousness, as all kingdoms rise towards the human and beyond, into the group consciousness of the three highest kingdoms, which are specifically the fifth, sixth, and seventh. Through the mediatorship of the human kingdom, so the kingdom of souls reached, the kingdom of planetary lives reached, and eventually the kingdom of solar lives reached, through the mediatorship of the human kingdom, which can relate the three higher kingdoms to the three lower. So man is a bit like the fixed cross in a certain sense, because he is a passage through which the great and expansive higher kingdoms can reach down and into the large mass of unconscious lives. So man is a relator under the fourth ray, under Mercury. And as we transition from the fixed cross toward the cardinal cross, we become more and more aware of our responsibility as a mediator in a planetary sense between these great superconscious kingdoms and the kingdoms which are still not yet self-conscious. So we become a conduit. There's a lot of pressure there. It's a very narrow type of passage as we try to uphold these superconscious kingdoms, or at least uphold our relationship with them, and bring down the good effect for the uplifting of the lower kingdoms towards humanity, and eventually all of us towards the superhuman kingdoms. Okay. Man can relate the higher and the lower expressions of divinity. It is here and in this connection that the sign Pisces, a sign of mediatorship, is of much importance, as it is a sign of mediatorship, that which stands between. Unless you are impressionable, you cannot be a mediator, because you cannot somehow receive from a higher position that which has to be transmitted to a lower. One thinks of Mercury also as the mediator, and of its very weak position in Pisces, but it's not really weak later, because then Mercury represents the intuition, and Mercury in Pisces, which is normally a fall position, becomes a kind of exaltation, because then it is really possible to take the intangible impressions from the higher kingdoms and actually transfer them to the lower kingdoms. So Mercury in Pisces becomes a truly mediating type of combination, which gets back to the idea that, every fall is really an exaltation if carried far enough. Every detriment is an advantage, and I could say that every exaltation is, from a certain point of view, a fall, because it is possible to indulge the vehicles easily and readily. I pointed out the exaltation of the moon in Taurus. It means many good things in terms of the excellence of the form, but in the early days, the form is just triumphant. It's exalted over the soul, and that is kind of a negative exaltation, isn't it? Okay, it is here and in this connection that the sign Pisces is of much importance, as it is the sign of mediatorship. Mediumship, in its true meaning, is expressive of the mass consciousness, impressibility, negativity, and receptivity. DK talked about the Pisces personality of Germany. You can probably figure out what I'm going to say. He said that because Germany had this very strong Pisces personality, it was so easily impressed by the Black Lodge, and a type of mass consciousness developed there, which was very negative to those very negative impressions, very receptive to them, and therefore carried out through a loss of will, the will of the Black Lodge. I mean, it was very interesting. Germany thought that it had such a strong will. I'm remembering the one of those movies by a great German filmmaker. What was her name? Something like Reifenschneider, something like that. Lenny, I think, was the first name. I can't remember the proper pronunciation of the second name. But she did this film in the early 30s called The Triumph of Will. And the people in it felt themselves to be so strong. Well, after all, they do have an Aries soul. They felt themselves to be so strong, so positive, so dominant, so invincible. But in fact, they were the impressionable, negative, receptive victims of a much higher internal astral mental force directed by the Black Lodge. So impressionability to mass think is one of the characteristics of Pisces, and mediumship, in a way, has not much will about it. One gives up one's will and opens oneself entirely to whatever the impressing medium may be. One is not conscious of this. So let's say there is unconsciousness, universal consciousness. There is unconsciousness. There is unconsciousness of the nature of the forces which are impressing. One is simply an empty house, and they can possess you, they can obsess you, they can take you over. The leaders of Germany, we are told, were possessed by great negative entities. In a way, the will of the entity was working through and over the will of any of those selfish individuals. They had cultivated that type of receptivity to negativity through lives of selfishness, Master DK tells us. So it is the sign of mediatorship, and mediumship is a lower form of mediatorship. Let's put that down. Mediumship is a lower form of mediatorship, but the mediator is in possession of his own will and chooses what will be given, what will be impressed and filtered and dispensed. So Alice Bailey sometimes thought she had a Pisces rising sign. She said she didn't know too much about the astrology. And Dane Rudyard rectified her chart. I think Mark Edmund Jones did too, to a Leo rising, which certainly looks right in terms of her appearance and her life and what was going on in the various houses. But she was musing about it. She wondered, could she have Cancer rising with its sensitive Neptune? Could she have Pisces rising because she was such a mediator, again with Neptune, receiving impression from the Tibetan and then passing it on? But of course, the higher intuition and mental telepathy under Gemini would have been sufficient to give Alice Bailey that ability, plus her long training with the Tibetan in previous incarnations, when, as he explains, she was a chela in the light, and he was her supervising internal disciple, reporting to the master. How interesting that all of these relationships are prepared lives before they may come into flower and fruition. We can ask ourselves right now, what is our present life preparing for? What is its trend? What is its trajectory? Towards what are we trending, which will be a fuller expression of our soul purpose? Okay, it is the sign of mediatorship, mediumship, um, in its true meaning, is expressive of the mass consciousness, impressionability or impressibility, negativity, and receptivity. They always come under Neptune. The mediums are ruled by Neptune in relation to Cancer and Pisces. DK says either with Sun in Cancer and Pisces rising, or Sun in Pisces and Cancer rising, and he advises us to do some sort of astrological statistical analysis of where mediums are found. But he so often refers to what's called the unintelligent medium, meaning that the mind, the will are not involved. One just sort of opens oneself to whatever and lets that take over, and that's what is not needed by us at this time. These points will become clearer as we study the signs and their many interrelations. The thought I wish to convey to you here is that at this stage, the influence of Pisces on the involutionary arc, remember how we began to talk about the beginner, and as the sun retrogrades through the signs, i.e. passes clockwise, that's a symbolic way of speaking, is felt largely in the anima mundi and in the hidden incarnated and imprisoned Christ. Is felt largely in the anima mundi, in the unconscious world soul, and in the hidden incarnated and imprisoned Christ. In other words, in this internal sensitivity, this internal consciousness which is not yet expressing itself as the true Christ force. So Pisces on the involutionary arc is indeed very sensitive, but more vulnerable, we might say, to the lower influences over which it has no control, no choice, no choosiness. You know how Virgo is opposite Pisces, it selects. But Pisces, in this early stages, is open to just everything. So Pisces has what we might call non-discriminatory receptivity. Non-discriminatory receptivity. The germs of the Christ life is psychically impressed. Gradually it grows, becoming constantly more sensitive to these psychical impressions. Now, remember what we're told about the Christ. Christ is the great psychic. He knows immediately, intuitively, that which is within man. So all of these impressions are sensitizing the internal Pisces soul to the day when it will be truly intuitively perceptive. But at first, it's just confused. Pisces people oftentimes have confusion. Pisces people are often confused by so many impressions accepted without discrimination. Okay. The germ of the Christ life is psychically impressed, becoming constantly more sensitive to these psychic impressions, swept by desire, which ever changes, thus the Piscean fluidity, and desires of the astral plane, to which plane Pisces is unusually sensitive, constantly aware of all impinging contacts. This is happening, that is happening, I felt this, I felt that, unstably vulnerable, but unable as yet to interpret them correctly, for the mind has not been awakened adequately in Virgo. So Virgo is a higher type of medium, a higher type of psychic, plus the intellect, able to interpret the many impressions. So, for Pisces, we have the condition of being overwhelmed by impression, confused, and unable to interpret and discriminate. And this is the early stage. We even find relatively advanced people today who rather drift along, impelled by all kinds of impressions which they cannot really analyze, understand, of which they cannot know the source. So obviously the antidote lies in the opposite sign. As is so often the case, the antidote lies in the opposite sign. And we should think of that in terms of our sun sign and our imbalances, because certainly we do have them. This hidden Christ, the hidden Christ, or the hidden consciousness, which will grow into the Christ consciousness, the hidden soul in incarnation, is unable to free itself from contact with water. and that means the many material impressions. Unable to free itself from contact with water, it needs to be dried out a bit, doesn't it? And in the sun and in the air, of course, the watery temperament is gradually dried out and becomes more objective and less compelled, less vulnerable, less inclined to wander, to drift, to meander. That point is eventually reached and is being reached with great rapidity in the present human stage. We are freeing ourselves from this non-objective, extremely psychically subjective state. We are freeing ourselves with great rapidity. And where another and major change is deemed desirable, and this is the result of the many lesser changes. So the point is eventually reached and is being reached where we're drying out. There are so many Pisces people, they have a tendency to drink or some sort of drugs. And it's kind of interesting that part of their rehabilitative process is called drying out, drying. Sometimes people who go through a program of alcoholic rehabilitation, well, they don't really get with it, but they stop drinking. So they're called dry drunks. They still have a great attachment to the water, but with their will, they've simply said no, but they haven't taken the remedial corrective steps. So they are in the process of drying out, but they're not there entirely. In the present human stage, where another and major change is deemed desirable, and this is the result of many lesser changes. So what is that change that is now deemed desirable? I suppose it is the coming of the distinct consciousness in humanity, or lifting humanity up into a true state of aspiration. Change is ever needed, but the method changes itself from the constant variability and mutability of the Mutable Cross to certain changes of a major kind which are brought about by a more permanent and directed life tendency. And these are called, let's just call them crises, deliberately, let's just see, crises understood and deliberately faced. And there are a few of them on the mutable, on the fixed cross. And page 472 in this book delineates various crises, and we've been talking about crises earlier of the battleground and of the birth and of the burning ground, but these are distinctive of the path, and they're not the constant, meaningless, little changes which make life so unstable that it's impossible to direct yourself forward towards expanding consciousness. Change is ever needed, but the method changes from the constant variability and mutability of the Mutable Cross. So when we think about the Mutable Cross, we think about constant variability and mutability, instability, to certain fixed changes which are characteristic of every developing Son of God on the fixed cross. They're brought about by a more permanent and directed life tendency. Okay, now we are reaching the end of this section, Esoteric Astrology Adventure 53, Part 2. That's the end of this. Do I have the stamina to go on? Is it wise? Will I slur my words? Will I blur my thought? It's this driving energy of Aries which makes me want to somehow forge ahead as may be possible. So anyway, we're up to page 123, and we began. Where did we begin? Are we really covering ground now? We began at page 120. So this ends on 120 and 120, and the section here, in case these are ever divided into hour-long sections for convenience, is page 120 to 123, and page 120 to 123. All right, we are speaking, it's so interesting, the ways that exoteric astrology, ordinary astrology, usually views these signs so limited, so unaware of the contrast between the lower, middling, and higher stages of response of any of these signs. So often, the highest levels of response are left out, and we are treated to a spectacle of all the lowest levels as if they characterize everybody, which they don't. They may characterize a lot of people, but they don't characterize all. So, when man tried to develop astrology by himself, or whatever he remembered from the ancient Chaldean days, certain truths were established, but so much was lost. And now I think teachers like Master DK and other members of the great internal astrological department are attempting to restore to man's consciousness some of the incredible wisdom of vast scope, which was lost in the degeneration of human consciousness. We are at that point in the new age when the mind of man can begin to again fathom the breadth and depth of this stupendous science. Okay, I'll just, so we'll go on to the third section here. Yes, we will do that. And, okay, we're going to move forward then. And we have ended part 2 of the approximately hour-long part 2, number 53. And we move more into Pisces. The man at this stage has within him the potencies and the characteristics of the indwelling Christ. We remember that a pair of opposites called soul and form are being related in Pisces, whereas spirit and matter are being related in Aries. Excuse me. But these characteristics, they are not manifesting and are only latent possibilities, for he is as yet entirely controlled by his form nature, the prism, and his environment. The moon is the prism. Moon rules water. Pisces is water. Matter, water, moon, prism. This is the whole idea of bondage and captivity in Pisces, being entirely controlled by the form nature and by his environment. In other words, circumstance wins, and the man has no positivity. He is not positive to circumstance, as later he becomes under the influence of Leo. The hidden powers of the soul are negated, and the powers of the form nature are positive, and are beginning to find increasingly potent expression. So the man becomes a medium for many lower forces, a way that they can get through. So many people that are obsessed or possessed are found in Pisces. Examples of multiple personality or of multiple users of a single vehicle. The man has no positive resistance against those who would take him over and use his vehicle. He cannot repel them. He is too receptive in the negative sense. What has to happen, of course, is the one becomes extremely receptive, extremely sensitive, but positive at the same time. In other words, able to choose one's receptivity and not allowing these entering, impressing forces to displace the center of will. The center of will must be held. The hidden powers of the soul are negative, and the powers of the form nature are positive, and beginning to find increasingly potent expression. So, as I explained in relation to Germany, many terrible things can happen when the individual is open to the often negative and sometimes evil forces that are focused on the astral plane. The natural spiritual tendencies of man are inhibited. Now, there's a word for Pisces: inhibition, handicap. Those are words for Pisces. We find often people who are paying karma are in a handicapped position. So inhibited, inhibition, and handicap. These are words which are connected with Pisces. The natural spiritual tendencies of man are inhibited. For Pisces is often a sign of inhibition and hindrances, and, of those helpful, kind, compassionate souls who work with those who are inhibited and handicapped and hindered. People in special education and people working with those who have less mental ability or who have emotional disturbances or who are addicted in some manner. People who have lost control of their lives. The Pisces people often come in and find a way to assist them, for in a way they have been there and they know what to do. I'm thinking about alcoholism in relation to Pisces and Alcoholics Anonymous, the kind of help that is received by Piscean people. There's nothing like going through an experience to make you more qualified to help those who are presently going through the experience. Or should we say, nothing like having gone through the experience. So there is inhibition here. Inhibition and hindrances, and the tendency for some to reach the so-called bottom of the barrel, the dregs of life. And how interesting that the Christ, when he was walking the earth in Palestine, did, in fact, associate with many people who were down and out and having the problems of being rejected as the lowest members of society. There he demonstrated his redemptive work. The natural animal and personality powers, particularly the emotional in this water sign, are the obvious and visible qualities of the man. So Pisces people often live an emotional life. I'm thinking about a very famous Pisces who died recently, Elizabeth Taylor, and her life was very dramatic. There are different horoscopes for her, one with Libra rising, one with Sagittarius rising, but always with the sun in Pisces, and showing all the melodramas of life. So there is, for this type of individual, animal powers emerging, personality powers emerging, and especially an emotional emphasis. I mean, when you think about it, Neptune, the god of the waters, is pervading the entire sign. A good deal of symbolism connected with the latent Christ and the outer expressive personality can be seen if a study is made of the biblical story of Jonah and the whale. Okay, well, I think we know a little bit about what the Tibetan will say here. The outer expressive personality and the latent Christ. Well, I have not time to enlarge upon it here, but it is a parable concerned with the Piscean stage of consciousness and the awakening of the Christ consciousness with the consequent dispute which that entails. Jonah stands for the hidden, imprisoned Christ, alive to the perils of the situation, and the whale of large size stands for the bondage of incarnation and for the personality. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And Jonah goes to the belly of the whale. He is swallowed in a Jupiterian fashion, engulfed by all of this, but he makes his way through and out, and each of us must do that as well. The Piscean stage of, well, it's very interesting, isn't it? We're all emerging now after a little more than 2,000 years from the Piscean stage of consciousness. We've gone through a very emotional phase, one of captivity, bondage, obedience, obedience often unreasoned, obedience to authority. This is a very Piscean thing. But it's also been an age of the development of the intellect, because every age has an opposite point, So it has been the age of Pisces Virgo, just the way our next age will be one of Aquarius Leo. So there have been many intellectual gains by humanity, and also the cultivation of a high idealism, which we now see manifested by many in the world, and sometimes in a very unintelligent manner. So the necessity of utilizing the sign Virgo to add intelligence to idealism is very important. Pisces, after all, has a lot of sixth rays, so it is an idealistic sign, and it is pervaded by Neptune on the sixth ray. Okay. The latent Christ and the outer expressive personality. This is what we want to overcome now. We want the subdued personality and the energized, expanded, empowered Christ principle, and maybe that will be able to emerge during the Aquarian age. It is possible. It is desirable. And the reappearance of the Christ, again in physical, tangible form through his Maya Virupa, probably. The Christ doesn't need to be born into some nice family, to a nice mother, as DK has said. The Christ has his vehicle. The reappearance of the Christ, the reemergence of the Christ, will certainly bring about in our age the growth of soul consciousness, the growth of group consciousness, the growth of the willingness to serve, the power to serve. We've been well disciplined in the Piscean age, I think. We've been through many horrors. Many dregs of karma have had to be dealt with. Some terrible dissolutions have occurred, and annihilations under Pluto have occurred. And people have been wiped out in these karmic events almost without knowing why it has occurred, because there is no great memory of planetary history, such as the masters have. When we learn more where we have been and what we've done, which every man should somehow intuit increasingly as possible, then we will not rail so much against the injustice of God, the deity. Ultimately, we have to come to the conclusion that we are God, the deity, or certainly extensions of that deity, and even now exist on the higher levels in great unitive states. So who is it that's suffering? There's one great undivided entity that is suffering in a certain sense through all of his extensions. We have to learn of the justice of karma. Saturn in Libra, as my old teacher used to say about justice, dividing the word, just ice. I guess it's pretty exact, pretty mathematical, although the quality of mercy lies behind that very rigorous justice. Okay, Pisces is a dual sign that the imprisoned soul and the personality enter upon that process which will transmute. It is in the dual sign that the imprisoned soul and the personality enter upon the process which will transmute, lift the vibrational level of, okay, let's see where we are here. And we don't want this one. This one need not be there. Let's see if I can go to save that. No, that won't work. That won't work. All right, I'll just leave it for the moment. It is in this dual sign that the imprisoned soul and the personality enter upon the process which will transmute, i.e. elevate the vibration of, improve the quality of matter, which will transmute the lower nature into the higher manifestation. Pisces is a sign of great sensitivity, also a sign of great pollution, also a sign of great pollution. And so it is at the end of the Piscean age, with matter in an amorphous form, oil related to Neptune, related to Pisces, the whole hydrocarbon thing, the kind of colloids, smoke, debris in our atmosphere. All of this is very Piscean. The possibility of dying in a polluted land is all very Piscean at the end of an age. So transmutation is necessary. The Virgo cleanup people have to come in under Pluto and Uranus and Virgo and take radical methods to precipitate out this sort of pervasive choking of our planet on pollutants and various kinds of gases. Transmutation is needed, a cleanup act is needed. So Pisces, here, we can witness the transmutation of the lower nature into the higher manifestation. We can witness or transmute the lower psychical powers into the higher spiritual faculties. We have but to look at certain chart, which I will find quite rapidly, I hope. Yes, here, this chart, all planes and faculties, that ought to be it. And we will see here, come now, okay, that there are many lower psychic powers here given, such as the clairaudience, psychometry, clairvoyance, imagination, so forth, and so on. And these are on the lower planes, and they are ways of perceiving the qualities and the vibrations of the lower planes in a direct manner, unmediated by thought. But up here, we have higher psychic powers, which the Piscean individual can also grasp. These lower powers here on the physical, emotional, and lower mental plane, in a way belong to the anima mundi, as it is usually considered, the world soul, the soul of substance. But the higher powers belong to a higher aspect of consciousness, a higher aspect of soul or of the world soul, and there are high psychics born in Pisces once they have clarified their aura, and they are able then to use the truly spiritual faculties which are related to the higher mental plane, the intuitional plane, the atmic plane, and so forth. Okay, the lower psychical powers are transmuted into spiritual faculties, which are quite unitive and always relate to the expression of the soul and other higher faculties. When the word spiritual is used, one thinks of the spiritual triad, and there are, DK gives us 10 different psychical faculties that are related to the spiritual triad. Not even 10, he gives us 11, and they are spiritual telepathy, comprehension of the four sounds, healing, divine vision, intuition, idealism, beatitude, active service, realization, perfection, and the upper one that we can't see here is all knowledge. Those 11 faculties are at least the spiritual faculties that he's given us so far. There are many others that are even beyond the ken of a master, we are told. So the lower psychical powers are transmuted into the higher spiritual faculties. Negativity, or receptiveness to any old thing, is transmuted into positive soul control. So it is the soul that can overcome vulnerability to many elemental forces. Mediumship is transmuted into mediatorship, and the will and mind are present, as they are not in the case of most unintelligent mediumship, except when the medium is maybe a Virgo. A higher form of mediumship is possible. The intelligence can be present. Clairvoyance, which is sort of the involuntary seeing of all kinds of phenomena, is transmuted into spiritual perception, usually of the formless worlds, of the so-called formless worlds. They really have form, but they are the arupa worlds of our cosmic physical plane. So we see the energies behind the many forms and phenomena and the phantasmagoria, as Master DK calls it, from which we must detach ourselves. Just being able to see all kinds of phenomena is a bit like, going on a roller coaster on the physical plane. You can see a whole lot of things that don't mean much. They're just there. And they change constantly, and they can overwhelm the consciousness, and they can prevent the individual from passing in a direct manner towards his goal. Clairaudience is transmuted into mental telepathy. Instead of hearing the many sounds of the many rushing waters, we hear the word of the soul, and finally we hear a still more divine word coming from the triad and monad, which brings us inspiration. Inspiration is interesting because here we have clairaudience associated with the third degree, and third ray, and inspiration associated with the first. And in the techniques of fusion in esoteric psychology too, DK says that third-ray people will have first-ray results, first-ray people will have second-ray results, second-ray people will have third results. It kind of goes around the triangle. So third-ray people become inspired by power. Instinct will be transmuted into intellect. Both are intelligent, but intellect will know why a tendency towards a certain type of activity or goal is operative. So we will be able to see instead of just feel. So often instinct kind of blindly feels its way. It's directed by some intelligent pattern which is not conscious to the individual. But intellect brings in consciousness of the goal and the why and the whither of all this direction. Selfishness in Pisces will be transmuted into divine selflessness. Well, in the early Pisces individual, there's a lot of preoccupation. One is the center of many sensations and many impressions, and one is just thinking of the impact that they have upon oneself. But eventually all of those lesser impressions are set aside, and the greatest lessons of humility and self-effacement and general selflessness are learned in Pisces. The self is really dissolved, and identification with a much larger self comes into actuality and expression. Selfishness into divine selflessness. Acquisitiveness, will go into renunciation. See, these are kind of some interesting Piscean characteristics that we might not think of as associated with Pisces. But, one becomes hungry for all of these impressions, hungry for matter, so identified with matter, until one becomes acquisitive, wants all that one is identified with, cannot discriminate, accumulates indiscriminately. But later all of that is seen as worthless and a deterrent to true spiritual life. And as much as there has been acquisition under Jupiter, think of it, Jupiter, a major planet of acquisition. I'm going to write that down as much for myself as anyone. Jupiter, a major planet of acquisition. Yes, indiscriminate acquisition, indiscriminate. There's not too much Mercury there to say what's worth having. I want it all. I want to be it all. Well, eventually one becomes it all, and one realizes one is it all. But that's when renunciation has taken the place of acquisitiveness. Normally, acquisitiveness found in Cancer with its, claws, and Capricorn with its ambition, but even Pisces, think of it, identifying with everything that hits you and sort of wanting to accumulate all that, kind of a perverse second-rate tendency, just growing too big. A lot of Pisces people can grow big in the body because they just accumulate indiscriminately too much. So acquisitiveness eventually into renunciation, the divesting of oneself of all that is not necessary, and that divestment comes under Pluto, not under Jupiter. Jupiter is the accumulation and Pluto is the divestment. I don't need all of this. It has nothing to do with my real essence. It's just an impediment. It's a hindrance, right? It's a handicap to have all of this stuff accumulated in my aura. So I give it up, gladly give it up. And some of the monastic and convent lives are spent in giving it up. Maybe a Virgo, Pisces kind of polarities involved in such lives, though not of course in all cases. Self-preservation through oversensitivity. goes into selfless world service when you realize that, look, you are not the personality and form you think you are. You know, if you're identified with your form, you naturally want to preserve it against all vulnerabilities, all impingements, all intrusions. You find a way to protect yourself, oftentimes by hiding away. But eventually you realize that, well, look, that's not my identity at all. I'm really invested in all these people, in all of these good events. And then you just say, well, I will sacrifice what I thought I was for what I really am, which is a spiritually pervading essence found in all human beings. So there are high and low expressions. Now, I think some of us are, we all know there are high and low expressions of every sign. Some of us are better at detecting the high and the low in different kinds of signs. Some of us have blind spots when it comes to detecting the high of certain signs or the low of certain signs. We have to have a little more equal understanding. So if you find as an astrologer that you really don't understand what the low of certain signs is, go into it, investigate it. And if you're always, you know, like esoteric astrologers are, thinking that Taurus is always material and so is Capricorn, and you don't understand the spiritual possibilities of these signs, then go into them and try to flesh out some of the highs of the signs which you were involuntarily capping at a certain level. Okay, and he's given us he's given us 9 different transmutations. Self-pity, well, no one can do it like a Pisces. Pisces rules the tear glands, you know, and the tears of self-pity have to be transmuted into the tears of compassion. The self-pity goes along with sensitivity. You know, this poor me, the world is too much with me, how very afflicted I am, how many impacts I have experienced. No one's more sensitive than I am. You know, it's kind of a second-rate Pisces thing. But eventually the transmutation occurs into compassion, where we feel as much outside the form as we do within the form. Ramakrishna had some Pisces in his chart, quite a bit, I think, actually. Pisces and Aquarius. And the old story goes, when crossing the river, he heard a master beating his slave and said, who is beating me? Who is beating me? You know, because he was so identified with all human beings and with all forms. And of course, the great statement of the Christ, inasmuch as you have done this unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. You know, if we really meditated upon that and the kind of identification that must connote, extraordinary, you know. When we're living our selfish lives and we begin to realize that there are great souls who are feeling even more acutely outside of their conventional self than they are within it. It's almost as if the greater sensitivity is out there with all the other human beings rather than in the individual's vehicle. And that is a real change of direction. That is the art of identification mastered. So self-pity transmuted into compassion, sympathy, and divine understanding, you know, to understand. It relates to the feet, to stand under, and to be somehow abstracted from all the phantasmagoria and yet part of the essence of it all. That word understanding really needs review, and if we were to look at it, we find it in Glamour World Problem here, right in the very beginning, and well, there you go. Okay. Understanding. This must be appreciated in its literal sense as that which stands under the totality of forms. It connotes the power of recession, or the capacity to withdraw, that's one of the important words, from one's age-long identification with form life. I would like to point out that this withdrawal is comparatively easy for those who have much of the first-rate quality in them. The problem is to withdraw in the esoteric sense, but to avoid at the same time the sense of separateness, of isolation, and of superiority. Much more demanding type of withdrawal, because there's kind of an attachment to spirit and essence and soul, which remains even as the consciousness withdraws from the form side of those beings through whom the spirit is expressing. It is easy for first-rate people to resist the tendency to identify themselves with others. To have true understanding involves an increased ability to love all beings. To have true understanding involves an increased ability to love all beings, and yet at the same time to preserve personality detachment, not to be moved in your personality by the fate of various people and beings, but to be moved in your soul, and not to want anything from the personality in relation to the person that one understands. One cannot desire something from whom from the individual one truly understands. One is there for them, and personality desire, personality in a way is equivalent to desire. Personality desire has nothing to do with it. This detachment can be so easily founded on an inability to love, in a selfish concern for one's own comfort, physical, mental, spiritual, and above all, emotional. DK is kind of making a case here in relation to the first-rate people, but we all have things to correct, don't we? So second-rate people are too attached, and first-rate people are too detached. They are polar opposites in a way. First-rate people dread emotion and despise it. But sometimes they have to swing into an emotional condition before they can use emotional sensitivity in the right manner. I'm remembering, in a way, how very emotional General Patton was. He probably, I think he had first-rate soul, certainly, but fourth-rate personality, most likely. And, he was one of those who would cry spontaneously, under certain conditions. So our evolution is not all that predictable, and it is hard to discern the ray because we all have characteristics of other rays which can camouflage what we really more essentially are. Understanding involves contact with life as an integrated personality. At least we have to reach that stage, plus egoic reaction to the group. We realize we are a soul with other souls in a larger aggregation called the group, towards egoic reaction to the group purposes and plans. Okay, the group and their purposes and plans. It connotes personality soul unification. Before we are a fairly soul-infused personality, we're not going to really have that recess, that recession, that understanding, that detachment from form and yet attachment to soul. It concerns personality soul unification, wide experience with a lot of human beings, I presume, and circumstances, and a rapid activity of the indwelling Christ principle. Yes, which is no longer handicapped or inhibited, but is throbbing with life. A rapid activity of the indwelling Christ principle. Intuitional understanding is always spontaneous, doesn't have to be thought about, planned, premeditated. Where the reasoning to an understanding enters, it is not the activity of the intuition. So he's really relating intuition and understanding. Understanding as a positive and immediate response to the soul nature of that which has to be understood. I think, that's really worthwhile going into, because so often we glibly use a word, like understanding. Oh, I understand you, which means I have kind of a mental conception of what's happening with you, but my heart isn't there. My identification with you as a soul isn't there. Or if I'm detached, I'm just in my mind understanding you cognitively, but my sense of identification isn't there. And maybe I'm attached to the outcome of my interaction with you, which shows my personality is there. So there are so many ways to misunderstand understanding. Okay, so we've had 9 transmutations that are related to Pisces, and of course these are very useful in determining the qualities of the Piscean individual. These starting qualities, negativity, mediumship, clairvoyance, clairaudience, instinct. These read like the who's who of Pisces, as far as most people are concerned. Selfishness, well, maybe not that one so much, but certainly is. Acquisitiveness, yes. Self-preservation, hide away and protect myself, And Pisces people are often in retreat one way or another. They are hiding themselves from consequences. They like to disappear. Sometimes, Pisces people are really quite invisible. It's startling. You can be in a crowd, and the one person who's not chosen or who's not seen is the Pisces person. They have this kind of aura of invisibility. Some of it's out of fear, and some of it's out of subtlety. Okay, so where are we here? We're looking at transmutations, the lower nature into the higher, the lower psychical powers into the spiritual faculties. Third transmutation, spiritual and mental inhibition, things hidden away, into soul expression and mental sensitivity. So mental sensitivity, I think, is somehow related to the mind as an organ of feeling, as strange as that may seem, and this is kind of a intuitive response. Can you feel with your mind? Well, can you think with your heart? Can you feel with your mind? I think there are people who definitely do feel into things with their mind. I sometimes wonder, when Venus is in Aries, apparently a detriment position, whether it's possible to feel a situation aesthetically, sentiently, with your mind. So this is not a common phrase, mental sensitivity. So often Pisces people, their true nature is hidden away. It is latent. They are somehow in the closet, as it were. The 12th house associated with Pisces is often in the horoscope called the closet. And when you come out of the closet, it's like coming out of the 12th house into the first house, sort of declaring yourself in many different ways. Some people stay in the closet their whole life. They're hidden away, and what they really are is not known by others. There are, of course, some very expressive Pisces people. It depends on the ray, it depends on which planet is strongest, it depends on other factors as well, but we always have to watch that tendency to hide oneself for fear of being discovered, and fear of being hurt, and fear of being vulnerable. All those things are part of the Piscean psychology. So, muteness, can you express spiritually? Can you express through words? Your mental inhibition has a lot to do, if we look at different positions, the fall of Mercury in Pisces. Because Mercury is that articulate planet, the planet which relates to the use of words and which is expressive and eloquent and so forth. And Pisces is just veiling all of that and hiding it. But eventually, the lower nature is so refined that the soul becomes transparent and can express, and the mental sensitivity, now that's Mercury in Pisces too. Mercury in Pisces, so it's a real feel for what the person is saying. Also, higher Mercury in Pisces. Any other transmutations? Yes. Devotion to the needs of the self, because Pisces is one of the devoted signs, pervaded by sixth-ray Neptune. Having sixth-ray comes with it constellationally, giving up oneself for others and so forth, but that comes later. But first, there is devotion to the needs of the self, because one is so sensitive, one is always being self-centered and thinking about the impacts, into developed devotion and response to the needs of humanity. As DK says, the Pisces people are so often found serving and helping and being selfless about it, and ministering, he said, ministering to the needs of other human beings. They know very well what it means to lose one's life in order to find it. Are there other transmutations? Yes. Attachment to the environment through impact, and to personality conditions, that is, identification with form, not able to discriminate. That's it. Not able to discriminate transform from formlessness at first into detachment from form under Pluto and ability to identify with the soul. You know, the less I am the form, the more I am what I really am. But then, of course, there's that great compassion, the compassion of the Pisces, which feels into the form and detects its need. One of the great psychic powers, says Master DK, is the ability to detect real need. And this ability is cultivated by the Piscean person. They feel the need immediately when they are highly developed. So, and they get into and behind the form. There are no boundaries for these Piscean people. Using Neptune, they get behind and within the form, and they feel the real condition, the disharmony, the lack, the handicap, whatever is behind and within the form, and then they're able to really become one of the major healing signs. Pisces is, when joined with the second ray and the seventh ray, one of the major healing signs because of the great empathy. But it's the empathy that comes about after there is much development. So at first, with the Pisces people, you cannot really expect them to discriminate the two aspects of the pairs of opposites. They will not. They will not know that there's a type of higher impressionability, which will gradually take over from their impressionability to just about everything. But eventually, through Pluto, comes the detachment from form it fails to satisfy. And one identifies with the soul in all forms, even sensitivity to, the subhuman kingdoms, sensitivity to humanity, sensitivity to the superconsciousness. Pisces is a sign of sensitivity, even though DK says that Leo is the sign of sensitivity. One of the keynotes of Leo is sensitivity. But that is sensitivity to the self and not self in Leo, especially. Okay, are there any other transmutations operative here? Okay, the ordinary low-grade medium is the outstanding example of the worst aspects of Pisces: negativity, impressionability, animal and emotional sensitivity, and complete undevelopment of the mental principle. So here, really, for the ordinary low-grade medium, Mercury really does fall in Pisces. It would be of interest, and here he's going to talk statistically and scientifically. He says it would be of interest to find out two things scientifically. Number one, whether the majority of the lowest kind of medium, trance mediums in particular, they sort of, vacate, and they are indiscriminate in terms of what comes through them. Trance mediums in particular have Pisces dominant in some powerful manner in their charts. I think that's an astrological kind of investigation which could be undertaken once things settle down a little bit. Astrology will prove itself statistically before humanity already. It is in process of doing so, as the work of Michel Gauquelin seems to demonstrate, and there are many others. And there are others, of course, who attempt to disprove it by the same means, but since it is the greatest and the oldest of the sciences, and since those who really study the subject, as Newton did, as he rebuked Halley for telling him he should have no business with astrology, those who really study the subject will see that, in fact, it works. Okay, and he wants to find out scientifically whether those mediums who are becoming more positive and more self-controlled and who are beginning to get a glimpse of the higher correspondences in their work, mediatorship and interpretive activity, have not got Virgo appearing somewhere with real potency and activity. So Virgo, more than being simply a sign of acute mental development, development of the concrete mind, is also a sign of sensitivity. The moon is the esoteric ruler. The moon is receptivity, and underneath that moon, one of the planets is Neptune, again, the psychic planet. So there is psychism of a less discriminating type in Pisces at first, and a psychism of a more discriminating type. In Virgo, Neptune is visible in both, and also in Cancer, Neptune is very strong. And I've also seen Aquarius there as well. with Neptune as one of the later rulers, veiled ruler. So he wants to find out whether the positive mediums have not got Virgo somewhere. Well, we could just make an investigation in that way. Someone with a good fifth ray and a lot of patience could do that. This might indicate the awakening of the mind, Virgo, in the first instance, and eventually, that there was a shift from the influence controlling them, from the orthodox planetary rulership to that of the esoteric planets. Well, he's just hinted at it, the Moon and Neptune in Virgo, right? Moon and Neptune in Virgo. A shift in that way, plus the intelligence of Mercury, exalted in Virgo and also ruling in Virgo. Saturn is exalted in Libra and is the hierarchical ruler, and Mercury is the first ruler of Virgo and exalted in Virgo. So it's a very intelligent sign. Yes, so ordinary low-grade mediums have to have their mind awakened so that they can perform mediatorship and can interpret that which impinges upon them rather than simply be a medium through which it happens and viewing the whole matter unintelligently, not able to really relate what it all means. It might be added that spiritualism and the work of the spiritualistic movement are under the influence of Pisces. And I want to say here, spiritualism is also under the influence of the seventh ray. So when you have a Pisces individual, in or under Pisces, plus the seventh ray, perhaps a soul or personality, we will really have the opportunity to reveal along the spiritualistic path. So it might be added that spiritualism and the work of the spiritualistic movement are under the influence of Pisces, with Cancer rising, or in some cases, the reverse, Cancer with Pisces rising. So more often, perhaps, Pisces with Cancer rising, and add to that the seventh ray, which does come in under Cancer, and you will have really the ability to materialize that which is subtle, perhaps in an etheric manner. That is one of the things that happens in spiritualism, the appearance of the ectoplasm and the ectoplasm taking the shape of the so-called spirits, which are coming in from a still subtler level. In the seventh ray age, there's going to be a lot of the investigation of spiritualism. You know who was interested in this, actually? Arthur Conan Doyle. I think he had a lot of Gemini. He was the author of Sherlock Holmes. He had this strong spirit of investigation and a logical mind, as Sherlock Holmes did, but he was also very sensitive. Sherlock Holmes, I'm thinking of him as kind of a reflection of Conan Doyle, was very Neptunian. He played the violin, and he took, what drug was it? Was it laudanum? Was it some sort of opium? In other words, he was involved in this Piscean, Neptunian thing to stimulate his intuition, and he had this incredibly logical mind. So you kind of wonder about the life of Conan Doyle. It could be researched, and I could just go to the horoscope of Conan Doyle, but that would be a digression, wouldn't it? So I'll leave that to someone else. I'm pretty sure, I'm really tempted to do this. No, I must resist. Or at least I must say I'm resisting while I'm not resisting. Perhaps I can do that. I'm not sure what role Neptune plays in the horoscope of Conan Doyle, and oftentimes one's projections, one's characters, if one is an author, are not necessarily projections of oneself. Famous, and some cleaner edition, famous and cleaner for book, and let's see if we can find this man. Okay, oh well, maybe I can't find him. Let's see, A-R-T-H-U-R, Arthur, I'll try that. Maybe it's under Doyle, Arthur Duke. Okay. It's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Well, okay. Yes, he is a Gem. Oh, look at all that Gemini. Wow. Moon in Aquarius. And there is Neptune with Vesta. Neptune in Pisces. Yes. He is one of those born with Neptune in Pisces, and it is square his Gemini planets. And it is, let's see, it has this big sextile to the Sun and to Uranus. It's up in the 11th house of the chart, a bit of a utopian, but certainly well-grounded with Saturn at the bottom of the chart. And Sun, Uranus, well, there we go. There's the spiritualism. There's the seventh ray, the Sun and Uranus together in Gemini and bringing through the higher and the lower. Let's see if there's anything here in the, what are these? These are the declinations, and nothing immediately involving Neptune. Well, there is an elevated Neptune, that's for sure, and he certainly is a writer, isn't he, with this Gemini rising and Mars and Jupiter both rising. But we don't know his rays, but we suspect with that prominent Sun-Uranus conjunction trine to the moon in Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus, there's a strong seventh ray. I suspect that he was a seventh ray soul, and he was bringing that through as he is writing about Sherlock Holmes, with a lot of fifth ray as well. Okay, let's see, where are we? Is it time to, well, not quite time. As regards the rays which express themselves through the planetary rulers and which absorb or collaborate with the influence of the sign Pisces. Now there's a hint. There is a hint that the rays expressing through the planetary rulers we would expect collaborate with the influences of the sign Pisces, but also absorb them. So, in other words, planetary rulers absorb the influences of the signs which they rule. Let's put that down. Planetary rulers absorb the influences of the signs which they rule. The rays which express themselves through the planetary rulers, and which absorb, or it's the rays, it's the planetary, it's the rays which absorb the influence of the signs. The rays of the sign, I suppose, and the planetary rulers absorb the influence of the signs through which they express and which they rule. Through which they express, I'll say that. The rays of the signs and the planetary rulers absorb. Okay, so every once in a while he drops a little hint like that, and you have to understand the significance of it, or at least attempt to. As regards the rays which express themselves through the planetary rulers and which absorb or collaborate with the influence of the sign Pisces and thus influence our planet and humanity, we find a most interesting situation. So I want to make those big if I can, so I remember them. Absorb and collaborate with. Okay, he's going to accent the first and second ray, I suspect. Two major rays which absorb the influence of the sign Pisces and collaborate with it. Two major rays express themselves through the rulers of Pisces. The major rays are rays 1, 2, and 3. Through the rulers of Pisces, orthodox and esoteric. The first ray of will and power focuses through Pluto, probably in the personality aspect of Pluto, and the second ray of love, wisdom, focuses through the orthodox exoteric ruler, probably in the soul, the second ray, the soul ray of Jupiter. It is the interplay of these dual potencies which do the following. Rays 1 and 2, they produce the duality of this sign. Well, what is that duality? Attachment and detachment, form and soul. And even eventually, I think, in the later days, the recognition of the monad or spirit. These two rays bring about the major problem of Pisces, which is psychic sensitivity. Well, we can certainly see this with respect to the second ray. That is the ray of the psychic, especially when combined with the sixth ray. But there is this whole question of what to be attached to and what to be detached from, and how to bring about your detachment from your over-identification. What's needed here is detachment from over-identification. That's what's needed. Identification. Okay. These two rays causes the lure of the path. In the first instance, the path of evolution, and later the lure of the probationary path, during which we begin to detach ourselves from all of the phantasmagoria to which we were attached, and later the lure of the probationary path, with the consequence that transference to the fixed cross, which is all that we can intelligently comprehend, begins really in Pisces. That's such an important statement. Transference to the fixed cross begins really in Pisces. So I suppose when Pluto starts to affect all of those detachments and losses in the life, one finds oneself able to envision a life upon the cross of the soul. So just think about that. There we are with Pisces, a mutable sign, and it's taking place at the very end of the mutable cross experience, allowing a kind of transition onto the cross of the growth of the sensitive soul. But later on, Pisces, as we have discussed, can be quite influential in ending the fixed cross experience, which certainly will end with the fourth initiation, and making it possible to step onto the cross of holes, W-H-O-L-E-S, which is the cardinal cross. Okay, so this is lure. Well, Pisces people easily fall into temptation, and they are mightily attracted. Lure, mightily attracted. M-I-G-H, mightily attracted. Yes, so first there's just this over-engagement with matter, and then Pluto comes along, the planet of death, and says, I'll have none of this. It all repulses me. The law of repulse begins to operate, the fourth law of the soul, and then we pull ourselves away and cut the threads which bound us to the unreal. Let's see, the transference to the fixed cross, which is all we can intelligently comprehend, begins really in Pisces, though impulse, if I may use such a word, in Aries, it begins and ends in Pisces. So Aries has the initiative to make the transference, but really the effective transference onto the fixed cross is made in Pisces, and it seems to end in Pisces as well. Does the fixed cross, FXCH, no, fixed cross, goodness, I could do that before, fixed cross end in Pisces also, in a Pisces experience? Perhaps. Okay, so the first and second ray within Pisces causes the lure of the path. Yes, that's the second ray part. In the first instance, the path of evolution, and eventually through the mediation or the assistance of that detaching power, the lure of the probationary path, which with its promise of expansion in consciousness. It's like a 2-1-2. At first, 2 attaches to matter, then Pisces says, none of this. That's the first ray says, none of this. I will detach, and the second ray again says, I will reattach to the soul. The impulse, if I may use such a word, in Aries that begins and ends in Pisces. Okay, well, the first and second ray again precipitates the process of transmutation and eventual escape through death. The combination of first and second rays. There's much to ponder here. The second ray is a refining influence, purifying influence, and the first ray is the destroying influence. So the 3 powers of Shambhala, we've been told, are purification, destruction, and organization. So those are rays 2, 1, and 3. So ray 2, purification, ray 2, purification, and ray what? Ray 1, destruction. So the first and second ray together, the second ray wants refinement, and the first ray will destroy all that which is not refined and adequately sensitive. What about the first and second ray again? It unfolds the significance, activity, and beauty of death and the work of the destroyer. Well, the beauty of death is Jupiter. Jupiter is often involved, we are told, in the death experience, a kind of a great magnetism from beyond the body, abstracts and draws the soul up into itself. So that is the eternally lovely secret of death, as DK calls it. Significance, activity, and beauty of death. So we go towards a realm of higher, more beautiful magnetism, and Pluto, with its first ray quality, applies the work of death and destroyer, which liberates into the higher life of the death experience. Well, there's much to ponder on there, much to ponder. But what he's basically saying is that there is a collaboration of the first and second ray with the energies of Pisces. Collaboration is one of the words, and the other word is absorption. As regards the rays which express themselves through the planetary rulers and which absorb or collaborate with the influence of the sign Pisces. So the rays are absorbing. That's an interesting thought, and we have to ponder on that. The rays are absorbing the influences of the sign Pisces. Certainly the planetary rulers absorb because they are lesser lords and they absorb the energy of the greater lords, but also their rays absorb the influences of the sign as well. Okay. We are on page 126. I do believe we have reached the point. Yes, so this is the end now of Esoteric Astrology Adventure 53, Part 3. And we are ending with page 126, and we began on page 123. So from page 123 to 126. Yes, come along now, come along. Speed reading course. Here we go. Page 123 to page 126. All right, so the question is at this point, shall I go on and try to make this 4 hours, or will 3 hours be sufficient? I will see in just a moment. Just a moment. Okay. Well, I think there's quite a bit more, another 8 pages in the Pisces chapter. So I think it would be wise at this point to see if this 3-hour program does work. I think a 2-hour program has worked. And rather than forge ahead here, give it a little break and work together, closing our discussion of Pisces, this part of it at least, with the great invocation. From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men, let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, a purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Okay, friends. So let's see how this downloads and if this works well. And we will carry on at our next opportunity. We will see how we go. And this is the end then of Esoteric Astrology number 53. Actually, I suppose we'd be up to 53, 54, 55, 56. The end of 56 probably in our old method of doing it. But let's see if this works well. Okay. Until then, we will continue with Pisces. There's so much of interest to be said. You know, when you get the opposites, like the first and the second ray, they really have a contrast and a tension between them. And that tension is revelatory. So it opens, lifts the veils, penetrates the veils, which is the cure for the low-grade psychic sensitivity and finally reveals the higher possibilities. Okay, we'll see you then. Bye-bye.